Welcome everybody. My name is Terry Adamson. I'm the Technical Director with Fenestration Canada, and we're here today for the Pacific Chapter in-person event. We're very, very pleased to have you here. I was going to intro the FenCan guys, but there's a few here. So Adrian Edge, who's our Codes Regulatory Director and Master of Tariffs. Cam Drew, where's Cam? Cam is member support. Who else? Mario's our IT tech guy. If it wasn't for him, you wouldn't be able to hear us. Jeff Makamoto's our commercial consultant. Jeff's here from Toronto. Is there anybody else in here that is FenCan? Put your hand up if you're. Lane Atkins, who runs the whole show. Without Lane, we would not be here. We'd be a bunch of cats. That's right. We'd be just cats running in every direction. Restrooms, right, left, right. And I think left anyway, you'll figure it out. Just don't leave it too long because it is a bit of a thing. Turn your phones off, please, if you don't mind. I'd like to thank Sherwin-Williams and JSA Machinery, Maria, and Bridget, sorry, I should know, and Martin with JSA Machinery. Thank you guys so much for your sponsorship. You guys are great supporters of FenCan. We really appreciate that. And of course, Kyle Cartwright. Kyle is with Westech Windows. Okay company, if you like that kind of thing, I guess. Kyle's the technical manager there. I worked with Kyle for many, many years. Had a lot of good times, a lot of frustrating times for sure. Dealing with the technical aspects of our industry. So we are going to get going right away. I think that's all of the things that I needed to talk about. So we are going to welcome Mr. Anton van Dyk with JRS. What does JRS stand for?
Joel Robin Schwartz.
You're not sure and you work there?
I don't know the Robin, it's Joel Schwartz.
All right.
I can't remember the
I'm just giving you a bad time. Down arrow moves you through. Do you need a mic?
Do I need a mic?
You guys, can you hear him?
Do I need a mic?
It's a pretty small room, right? So.
A history lesson here. In my time at Centra Windows, I spent a lot of time networking with Hydro and Fortis, kind of on purpose. And I would encourage those of you that are in the room, if you don't like the rebate programs, get involved. Actually, it was something Joel, who I work with, taught me when I was very young in my career. If you don't like something, volunteer and fix it. It's the only way you're going to do it. If you sit back and listen, test. A lot of feedback. But so BC Hydro and Fortis over the years would almost ask me to sit at the table with them to evaluate programs like this and give them feedback from an industry perspective. That sort of stopped. And I don't know if there's anybody doing that anymore. In fact, it's Tanya, right? Yeah, so from the Home Performance Stakeholders Committee, you just got HPSC, but the original was the Home Performance Stakeholders Committee. And just to give everybody an understanding of how that came to be, there was a report written probably 15 years ago, and I was brought into it to talk about, from a window perspective, what this program looked like. And what we came out of it is the industry was fragmented. You had HVAC doing one thing, insulation doing another thing, windows doing another thing, and everybody was independent and everybody was trying to get their own thing. And we created this stakeholders group that basically, remember, we got 300 grand originally from Fortis to basically fund the creation of this thing. And fast forward to today, and we have this sort of industry. I had been telling them over and over and over again, you need something for multifamily. And it was like, nope, not going to work. In fact, they started pulling windows out of the program. And the reason why BC Hydro doesn't really like windows in the program is because they don't see the huge value in improving the reduction of electricity. And so there was a program for a number of years back in like 2013, 2014, where windows weren't even included. So the risk of these programs, if you don't get involved, is you might find out one day that windows are no longer part of the program. So I strongly recommend, if you have people in your organization that like to volunteer and be influencers, to get involved. Now, this program is not perfect. It's probably full of issues, but it's the program we have. So I'm going to basically think that there's going to be a version 2 come out, hopefully, if we can get some industry feedback, and it might be something FenCan can actually potentially try to sit at the table a bit. So, oh, this one? Okay. So we'll go over a bit of a summary of it. The program is basically designed, it's working with stratas on complexes that are both electrically heated and gas heated. So it's not just for electrically heated buildings. That's something to keep in mind. It goes to anything. It can be stratas, it can be rental buildings, it can be anything that sort of looks at that concept of ownership, but it just has to be a multifamily building. There's a bit of a debate about how townhomes come into the picture, because row homes are technically part of the Clean BC program, but townhomes are not. I don't know what the difference is. So there's something that I've always said that needs to be cleaned up from a perspective of townhomes versus row homes. But this program gives you a little bit of a flexibility in what it all sort of covers. It predominantly favors equipment upgrades, by the way, and electrical capacity evaluations. And then windows are in there for focusing on the envelope. So apartments, condos, townhomes, 3 stories or higher with common area lighting, central. So I think the whole concept of row homes is when you don't have any common areas, which is predominantly the townhomes that we do today. So I'm not quite sure. I've never really run into a situation where we could determine up front whether a row home or a townhome would be like what would fall under the Clean BC program, which is a rebate per window, versus the MURB program, which is a rebate per square foot up to a maximum. And like I said, electrically heated, natural gas, oil, or propane. So the idea is in a roundabout way to get equipment switching into buildings. So what's available? My understanding, and from what we've been told, $60 million is the budget that has been raised for this program. We don't know how much money has been spent to date. Projects are just starting to get approved for the assessment stage. I haven't heard of any projects getting approved for actually funding the renovation. So there's still a fair bit of money available. The question I had for BC Hydro is how much is this money connected to the carbon tax, which is no longer? Because if there's no more carbon tax, what stream of funding is going to come into programs like this? So my understanding of the Clean BC programs, and maybe Tanya can answer this question, is that program funded 100% by the carbon tax? And if the carbon tax is gone, what happens to that program? Will it have a sunset here? Or is that program funded by the utilities, which I believe are incentivized to convince people to use less of their utility? That's one of the sort of functions, I think they call it the demand side management, is the division of both Fortis and BC Hydro that go into it. So it's all about getting buildings to reduce their actual energy consumption, which is, in my perspective, a good thing, because I'm not sure if those of you remember, there was an electrical upgrade that needed to go to Victoria, and there was these overhead power lines that went through Tsawwassen. It's probably 15 years ago. And they had to go from wood poles, small little poles, to these big steel structures. And all the houses that flanked them were going to lose their property value. And BC Hydro, I believe, had to buy all the properties because their property values tanked. And it's this concept that having to bring in more hydro capacity versus getting buildings to use less. Anytime you can get a building to use less, you have less demand on infrastructure, which is better off big picture wise. So that's a bit of the motivation behind some of these programs. So the amount of funding that we get is you get 50% of the total project cost, up to $500,000. And then there's going to be caps on individual items you do. The biggest mistake that I've seen people make in both this program and the other rebate programs that exist out there, especially like the loan program, there's a $40,000 loan program, but only $5,000 of that can be earmarked to windows. And I had a customer once buy $25,000 worth of windows thinking they were going to get a $25,000 interest-free loan, only to find out that $5,000 of that loan, of that amount, was interest-free, which they didn't have the money, which became a real problem with that program because they found out after the fact, after the windows were done, after all the work was completed. So it's important to set the expectation up front with the consumer about what money they're going to get. And the nice part about this program is it comes with BC Hydro approvals throughout everything. For sites with multiple buildings, there's a cap of $750,000. The improvements of greater than 10,000 kilowatt hours per year I think we're at about 10 cents a kilowatt hour right now. So it's about $1,000 improvement on a building. So very, very, very low threshold for meeting the target to get the money. And then there's a bit of a time frame to the projects being completed, which I had an interesting conversation. Projects must be completed and rebate applications submitted by the program's closing date. You have 1 year to get the project done. Does anybody know how long it can take to get a building permit? So I brought that up to BC Hydro and they went, oh, interesting. So we have one project in North Vancouver, for example, 2 years. We're still waiting. And they wanted to add a sewer upgrade, some parking issues and landscaping stuff for replacing windows and siding. So there's a lot of municipalities that are creating issues around these types of programs for multifamily buildings, hence why a lot of people want to do projects without building permits, because especially windows. But the whole issue is everybody's a bit afraid to do these projects now without building permits because you know what U value needs to go into a building anymore. So the primary process here, step one, is a building has to go through what's called an opportunity assessment. And then once that assessment's done, it's going to determine basically all the different items that could be upgraded and the potential for the building for upgrades. And then if it gets approved, it'll go into a feasibility study, which is doing a detailed calculation. So if you're thinking of the step code, this is basically doing some of those calculations like a new construction. So we just, JRS is an Alliance energy professional. So we do these assessment reports for stratas. We just got our first one applied for and approved. It took about 3 weeks to get the building approved to do the actual opportunity assessment. And so the time frame isn't too bad. It doesn't hold things up too much. The feasibility study is an interesting one because it gets everything into electrical design. There's about 4 or 5 different consultants that get pulled into that project. So that'll be a bit more of a process to go through. And both of these are paid 100% by BC Hydro. So this is zero money out of pocket by the strata, other than the GST. What does it cover? Lighting, HVAC, the building envelope, pretty much just windows, other than there is some custom projects. But I think the main thing is to really assess buildings to figure out what their total energy efficiency is and start getting that data recorded. So this is a bit of a breakdown of the items that are on the list. Lighting upgrades. The one electrical capacity upgrades, $130 per ton of saving, of greenhouse gas savings. This is one where you're starting to see buildings look at what's the electrical capacity needed for a building as we start looking at adding heat pumps and electrical car chargers. So I think the main motivation of this program is to start collecting data on multifamily buildings to determine what type of electrical capacity we need. There's a building, for example, a new construction project I'm involved with, where there's limited electrical capacity on site, so they need to use gas for heating. And there's a problem with that because there's a greenhouse gas cap on how much natural gas can be burnt to heat the building. So what's their design solution? Anybody want to take a guess? High heat gain glass. So it was an interesting, it's an interesting project because there's not enough electricity on the site. And this is something that people are starting to raise the alarm bells going, if we're switching everything from gas to electricity, how do we do that? And this program is going to start collecting a lot of data. But I can tell you through the way energy advisors are doing a lot of calculations, the only way that I've seen it done is high heat gain glass. Because you can have electricity for cooling in the summer, but the high heat gain glass offsets the amount of greenhouse gas consumption. So the introduction of the zero carbon step code is going to trigger most likely a lot of high solar heat gain glazing specs when you got gas heated buildings, just FYI. So certain things that don't seem to be consequential can start to pop up and become consequential. So the whole idea of electrification is going to have an interesting impact, in my opinion, on glazing. So when you go through the this feasibility study, we need to be paying attention to what energy advisors are going to be speccing for window retrofits and the high solar heat gain. And I can assure you that unqualified energy advisors are going to be recommending probably a 0.40 solar heat gain coefficient on buildings that have gas heating, because there is a path in this thing that will allow you to use, to put new windows in on gas heated buildings. There's a lot in here on heat pumps. I have very little experience in the world of heat pumps, so I'm not going to talk much about that. But getting into the glazing side, if you went onto their website when it first came out, the program, and downloaded the handbook, delete it and re-download it, they updated it, didn't change the date on the version 2. So it was very confusing. So I remember when we first started having initial conversation, it just said high performance windows. And we're like, well, what is that? And I think it might have said code minimum. Well, it's now defined at a U value of 1.53. There's 0 caps on high solar heat gain. Don't know where the numbers come from. $30 a square foot for glazing was always the initial amount, but then they put a cap of $1,200 per rough opening. The other kicker is the existing glazing system must be single or double glazed with non-thermally broken frames. So some might say, what do they mean by that? Like, are they assuming anything that's not vinyl? The answer is no, non-thermally broken aluminum. They basically are taking the assumption that there's going to be limited funds available and we're going to narrow it down to the worst of the worst windows on the marketplace. So now there are custom projects. So if you look at the handbook, you'll see under the column for gas heated or fossil fuel heated buildings, there is 0 window rebate. But we've been told as an Alliance member that for gas heated buildings, if you want to do windows and you can do a heating switch, you could potentially get a rebate for windows if you upgraded the heating system. So the example I have is a project I'm actually involved in right now where they want to, it started with them wanting to replace windows. So I brought up this program and they said, oh, if it's free, why not do it? And that's literally how the conversation goes. They want to do something and then they learn about the program that they can get $35,000 in assessment costs covered by BC Hydro. They have a central boiler that is, their heating bills are paid for through the strata fees as one big central boiler. It's at the end of its service life. They want to do windows at the same time. And now we're actually entertaining the idea of doing a heating system upgrade, which potentially could look at putting heat pumps on every balcony, getting rid of the boiler, and do windows at the same time. So there's sort of these opportunities at play right now with certain buildings to be creative when it comes down to improving the building as a system more than just doing it component by component. So that's sort of the idea of working through that system. Custom projects, if you were involved in a building that was a classic leaky condo retrofit where you're doing cladding, windows, siding, everything, you can get funds. There's a project we're involved with right now. It's about a $10 million building envelope rehabilitation, and basically proposed it to the program, and there's $500,000 worth of funds available to a strata just to basically help them. So it's something to bring up. I don't see the program being an obstacle to slowing things down so much. It's the approval process of the BC Hydro program is faster than the building permit process, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Yeah, so the application process. So this is something a strata can do on their own, or they can go through the Alliance professional. My only shameless plug for this one is we can do that for any of your clients. It streamlines the process a little bit. We need a couple documents, kind of go through it. Yeah, and then they get approved for every step. So it's not like the Clean BC program where you do all the work and then you file for the rebate and hope you qualify. So it's you're not committing to it exactly as we go. And so so free assessments, which is pretty much, I have not seen a single strata turn one down yet. It allows you to know the building, funding from BC Hydro, and the owners can walk away. This is, I think, a key is you don't have to do the renovation. And this is why I think there's motivations to do the assessments to get an understanding of what these buildings are doing. So there's no obligation of doing the work after you do the assessment, which is a bit of a benefit on that end. So, and that's it. So that's basically, I was hoping BC Hydro would be here to answer some direct questions, but the reality is
you said that there was a 1.53 U value, but that was in a specific type of project, or that's the number across the board?
That's the value of the replacement windows.
Okay.
So whatever you choose to do, that's the number. I tried to ask where that number came from, and I got no answer. So it's an interesting program. Like you can go right to the top and you can, I don't know who came up with the program, how it was designed. what its intent is. It just sort of landed on our desk, and that's it. Another key factor is, as a supplier contractor, you need to be under the, what do you call it, the Alliance program, be qualified to do the work. So what's the program called again?
We have a different program for single family.
Yeah.
But I think you're speaking to the line.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same. If you've done it for single family, you'll qualify for the multifamily program. So
Did you get any indication of the activity of the window retrofits? Like, are we seeing projects getting done?
none have reached the stage yet that I've seen where it's just the time from this program was announced in the fall,
Yeah.
November. So by the time Estrada shows interest, hires someone, does the application, we have one customer. He owns like, I don't know, 5 or 6 rental buildings. So he's just started the process for all of his buildings, just to get them all assessed. And then some of them are looking at it kind of like part of a depreciation report process. Like if you've got a depreciation report on your building and windows are on the list. But I would say I've probably had 5 or 6 meetings in the last 2 or 3 months with Stratas. They're all, hey, we want to do our windows. And I sit down with them and I said, have you heard of this program? And they usually bring up another program because this is how confusing it is. Fortis has got this other program, all these other custom programs. And so I'm scratching my head sometimes trying to figure out what program are you talking about? And so I don't know. This is just a specific one from BC Hydro. And as soon as I talk about the $35,000 in free assessments, they're pretty much, well, when can we start?
Mhm.
And let's get it done. So it's kind of going into the big picture planning. Like I have one right now where they're basically doing this assessment. They're doing all their hazardous material assessments. They're getting ready to do something to their building. They just don't know what yet, and they don't know how to prioritize what they want to do. So I see this program helping with that process a little bit. My belief and my background is building science, so I believe in the envelope first approach. The program does have the concept of envelope first in it. And so I think that's a good thing for our industry and why I would encourage more industry involvement and getting to know key people at BC Hydro to be a bit of an advisor, because at the end of the day, they don't know enough about windows to know the value of new windows and the consequences too. Because I do see this without a solar heat gain cap in there. I see a potential issue. Because you can go from an old window with clear glass where the heat that comes in, the heat leaves equally. But if you go with like a Cardinal 180, the heat comes in and the heat doesn't come out. And then meantime, you add heat pumps to the units and they add cooling. And next thing you know, people will be, hey, our bills have increased. I thought it was supposed to get cheaper. But now
Imagine
your
that.
cooling bill, you've added cooling, which, maybe it'll offset some of the heating costs. But if you have more cooling, what good is it?
So you talked a lot about, not a lot, but you talked about high gain glass potentially, making its way into this program. Is it an either or, like a 153 or high gain, whatever that means? Like I'm trying to understand where you're going to see the use of high gain glass if it needs to be a 153, because that limits it somewhat.
Well, yeah. So if an electrically heated building, if you just wanted to do windows, you can take, and the old windows are double pane, non-thermally broken aluminum. And I'm working on one right now with that exact situation. And we'll just take the old windows out, put new windows in. The new windows just have to be 153 or better. If the strata wants to do triple glazing, by all means, do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I think it's going to get tricky, is with the ones that are currently natural gas heated, that you can get a window rebate, but only if you do a fuel switch, meaning you go from natural gas to electric heat and invest in that in the building, and they'll fund up to $500,000 for that. When you do the energy calculations on that in an existing building with 2x4 steel stud walls on a 14-story high-rise, like I'm looking at one right now, in order to make that building most likely work with heat pumps into the building, and you take the furnace out, you're going to probably need to make up some winter heat somewhere, which is going to basically, if you did a calculation, it's going to be high heat gain glass, is going to be my prediction.
Okay.
Because we're seeing it at step 3 and step 4 in new construction. Any building with limited electrical capacity, high heat gain glass is in some cases the only way you're hitting step 4. So.
Oh, you're taking a heavy sigh already.
You're buying me a beer if you say F280.
Yeah, that's right. Mine is all a beer.
Yeah. And thanks, Anton. It brings up an important point, and I want to add something from our experience and to the issue of row housing. I don't know if it was good or bad. There's a big complex in Port Coquitlam, and it was built in the 90s, and it's all naturally aspirated heating and hot water systems, B-vented. And with those clients, they have no control on if and when, other than their one vote, on if and when the envelope is going to see any kind of attention and what that'll look like. How far they're going to push it, where the law is going to be in terms of how far you have to go with retrofit and everything else. So let me pull back on an experience there and then make a comment, and then I don't know if it's helpful. What we're finding in there is you can only control what you can control. So what we did is we went in there and did a heat loss and sensible cooling load calculation. So I didn't say FTA. And one of the realizations that we're having is, first of all, you got to listen to your client at that point. Where's your best bang for the buck? And in those older homes, the biggest complaint they have is, I can't live in this thing and work at home as a home office during the day in the summer because I'm just cooked out of this. So their motivation for the things they could control was actually in cooling. What they didn't want to do is make a huge mistake, because it's a fairly substantial commitment. And what does that mean? So we help them to understand, control the things you can control. You've got a replacement already natural gas domestic hot water system in there that's B-vented. You've got a perfectly good mid-high efficiency, which will probably still be running 100 years from now, right? I mean, they just don't quit, or when they do, it's quite far down the equation. And the point that I'm getting to here is, by understanding all of your energy contemplations, the programs are adhered to HOT 2000, because it's some fictitious metric about what your annual fuel utilization is going to be, and therefore it's attached to their overall macro goals, maybe, but it really doesn't represent the way the house is going to be used. But it's some kind of commonality. But the tools that they use for that are HOT 2000, and it doesn't even work on cooling, by its own admission. It absolutely doesn't work for cooling. So the tendency already with HOT 2000 in new and retrofit consulting is just to drive the heat gain coefficient, right? They're already doing it. They go in there and put the worst possible glass into that thing, get their winter heating on the thing, and Bob's their uncle. Whereas the truth that we're finding is all of these bad habits seem to be stemming from the fact that, despite kicking and screaming, we thought the best thing to do was go into a step code and nationally into a tier code. So there's now 5 levels of, wow, that's great. When the emergency exits, de-energize.
I thought I was having a stroke.
Of all the systems you don't want to have go out. Yeah.
You turn the lights off?
No, it was the emergency lighting, and then that went on to a backup energy.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
Well, anytime I get the mic, somebody tries anything to get me to put it down.
Shut them down.
So let me put it all together. The solution for them was, well, you want cooling. So what size of a heat pump do we want to put in there? Well, the advantage is they still got heating in there. So we were able to right size it for the potential that strata was going to prioritize envelope, but in looking at that, prioritize it to what? So we chose net zero, the point at which you could collect renewable energies. And to put that in perspective, we're at step 3, tier 3, 20% improvement over what we built in the 80s. I mean, really, why bother? And then step 4, which some people are basically tipping their toes into, 40% improvement. But to get to true net zero, some you talk to 70%, 80, 90, 100, 110%. It's factor what your roof looks like and your solar exposure and everything else. But it's, the metric is you get to step 4 and you got to basically double it at least to get into true net zero. So what happens there, and why should we talk about it? Because every new design in Canada by the end of 2029 or the beginning of 2030 is going to have to be at net zero. It's law. Every new home built. And the new thrust for a code for existing buildings, the minute you trigger anything, the new draft, and you'll take a look at the language when you see it in the 25 national model code come out, you're not going to do any kind of retrofit without accounting to that. It doesn't matter what part of the code you're in. So you're going to be adhering to these targets. And, it took us 3 years to stumble into step 3 with the education program. It's still not finished, and that's a disaster in there. So where does all of this background information come together? It's a little bit beyond concerning yourself with envelope first, although it's always the lowest common denominator and the most lasting, and ultimately should be the system that when you achieve net zero, you never have to deal with it again. Air tightness, insulation, and then the windows would just renew based on performance. And as long as you can recapture that energy year over year, you really don't have to push it energy performance any further than what you needed to get there. So What we find is that you start running into a problem going over to mandatory cooling provisions. And in the 2025, all new homes will have to have it. BC is currently just one room, area of refuge, but they've realized that that's garbage and there's no tools for it. So we're going to go into an era where you need to think about that heat pump that's being put in right now. And that has to drive your choices on how you balance your choices. And the big issue on the envelope there is balancing your solar heat gain coefficient so that it works okay now while you got supplemental heat coming out of your yin yang because you still got old heating choices in there. And then in 4 or 5 short years, any other future work in there or the natural evolution of capital renewals, you haven't committed yourself to a window choice that doesn't make any sense from that point forward because you're overloaded on one side. Now your heat pump has to be sized for the worst demand load, cooling or heating. So it now by definition is wrong sized for either the heating or the cooling choice. Don't lose your numbers, you know, don't get mad at me. It's just a truth. You have to design to a balanced true net zero, which is our real future in there. And it really makes me question, why did we ever try this step code? It really doesn't do anything and doesn't teach you any of the tools that you need to succeed at true net zero. So I'll leave you with one thought. We have never gotten a client in retrofit or new construction in the last 3 years who's gone to net zero, who has not actually built it for less money than you could build a 1988 home. Because your cooling and heating load total goes down to 20 or 25% of what it used to be. All the emphasis now is on ventilation, which doesn't change. But the ventilation doesn't change. You have to vent that amount. So air tightness is always a great currency for you, and so is energy and heat recovery. So I think a lot of these programs, well intended, but they're going to leave a future problem 5 years from now if you don't pay attention to those things and make those choices. So is this a complaint about? I haven't looked into this program in here, but there is that hybrid in this conversation where that townhouse is a Part 3 structure. It's a strata building that has a common decision for the building envelope in there, but the individual owners have choices about what they do inside their 6 walls or their 6 planes. And that doesn't get picked up in this decision path either. So should we be looking at a more pulled back, questioning what good is the energy metrics that we're using if they don't work for cooling? And who's the winner at the end of the day if we take that, that true, and look at all the money you got here in for consulting. I know you guys are running all those numbers when you do it, right? 90.1 and all the tools that are in the engineering world out there. But how many people out there don't care? They just tweak a solar heat gain and take the shortcut, and then you got nothing. You got no value.
So the 2025 National Code is proposed language to cap, I think at 0.26 for our climate zone based on a
30%. Yeah, 30% window to wall ratio. Yeah.
The big mistake I see happening, and one of the things that I'm going to try to do with this program is try to promote that there's some sort of upper cap on solar heat gain because it forces the energy advisors to be more creative, in my opinion. When I proposed or showed that, I think, Adrian, you presented it a while back, and I showed that to our energy advisors in our company. He goes, oh, that is going to be a game changer, a 0.26. Like, it is going to make their job much more difficult. And there's going to be more of an emphasis on lower U values instead of high solar heat gain.
Yeah.
So a project that I had that was a step 3 design that they decided to go to step 4 at the very end. The solution was to go from a 0.27 solar heat gain to a 0.4. That was the difference between step 3 and step 4. That's it.
20 to 40%.
Yeah. So, and the solution was, air conditioning will deal with comfort. But then the question comes down to, this case study I always show is when the homeowner puts heat reflective blinds on the inside and melts the windows. So this program, I think, to be viable and kind of where you're going to set it up so it's at least decently successful is to start capping solar heat gain. The other way I look at these programs is we don't want to criticize the program too much because it's a program. Once we have a program, it's easier to make a program better than it is to start a program off from scratch. So if we can start to figure out where the little benefits are that go into it, I think is going to be a huge added value. The other part that is problematic is the energy advisors, energy consultants, whatever you want to call them, whether they're a professional or not a professional, they don't understand what's available when they spec a solar heat gain coefficient. So you'll see a lot spec a 0.35. Find that glass. You either get up to about a 0.30, 0.31, in my opinion, experience, just I did a lot with Cardinal. So Cardinal 270 is probably getting around a 0.30 to 0.32. And then you go to Cardinal 180 and you jump to 0.45, and there's nothing in between. So what happens is a lot of energy advisors do their calculation based on 0.35, and what gets supplied is sometimes 0.5, and they don't know it.
Yeah.
And so there's been a couple projects I've been involved in recently where the design was done and then the shop drawings come through after the fact, and the shop drawings, because there was no upper limit on solar heat gain, it was, well, bigger is no problem, right? I'm still in compliant with my contract that I'm doing, because it said 0.35 or higher. So trying to teach and educate, and actually if you look at the single family home program for Clean BC, the original one, you'll notice that it doesn't use Energy Star product in British Columbia. That is because I educated BC Hydro at one time what the ER path was all about. Whereas why you see it in the federal program, they use Energy Star as the compliance path. So those that were getting rebates through the Clean BC program were getting good U values and relatively moderate solar heat gain coefficients, where the federal program was promoting Energy Star and high solar heat gain glass. So these are kind of the situations at play. Every single time I've shown an existing homeowner, the Cardinal's got those little boxes with the little radio meters that spin, and you show a homeowner the difference between clear 180, 270, and 366, 90% of the time they will pick 366. So to the homeowner, it makes perfect sense, low solar heat gain, which is counterintuitive to the energy calculations going on that we're doing in the system. So not a perfect program, and like everything, we need to improve. But I think I do have a path to individuals there, and this is version 2 already. So it's not to say that we couldn't get a version 3 coming out once we get into it. So
if you don't mind, I'd like to just throw a concept into the field of this conversation, which is spending as much time on the solar heat gain conversation as we have, it's obviously kind of the main problem in the background, but I think it's a stopgap to talk about the upper levels of solar heat gain. The bigger problem to me feels like it's a maturity of our energy advisors being able to do cooling loads appropriately. It really, that feels to me the real problem, is that if we were modeling these buildings in such a way that we understood, call it the gain potential, that would actually solve this problem and give them design flexibility. But
So yeah, vicious agreement there. The simple answer here is just have an actual sensible cooling load calculation done, and then to go to a heat pump, which is your only viable choice at this point in time. It seems politically that makes them all happy too. I don't want to argue if it's the right choice, but it is the solution to net zero in the technology we have right now. If you simply do a sensible cooling load and compare that to your heat load, you'll realize that you can't order a heat pump that satisfies that and keeps you in spec. And you chase cooling loads on 95% of your projects. So by just doing that, now let me add one other thing. That tool is a heat loss heat gain calculation on a room by room basis, right? And it's mandatory under the code, full stop, or an equivalent by a design professional doing consulting for big boy buildings in part 3. So we already have it. And the number is actually already a requirement throughout the entire country. It's just nobody's taking a look at it. But if you went to your client and said, how do you feel about that living room, dining room, kitchen, great room, south facing with this kind of a cooling load on there? Well, what does that mean? Well, it means we can't get a heat pump to go there, and you're just going to cook yourself in there for anytime you got a sunset on the west or you got a southern exposure in there and you can't use the space. Well, then your client is going to be driven into making, what are my choices? Well, let's balance it by putting the right glazing choice in here, and your problem goes away. So instead of just chasing hard targets, where are they? Especially in a step code, because it's not going to be the same answer as you go through it. We only got a dwell time of 2 years on each one of these steps until we get where we're supposed to go. I just think the enforcement of the existing requirements that are in there, and recognizing that HOT 2000 is zero reliability for anything to do with cooling.
yeah, and just to add a little bit to that, in the 2025 code, the modeling the background that makes up the modeling is F20. It's F280. Like that is the
Okay,
modeling
you're buying beer
methodology.
this afternoon.
I said it. I own it.
All right.
But it is a part of, it's going to be a part of what we get passed down to BC from the national code. We are going to be expected to be modeling like that because that is how our base models are all going to look.
It's already in the basic code. It's been in for 16
Right.
years.
So again, I feel like I lean into it's a maturity of our energy advisors at this point and what we expect from them. They're going to have to do a room by room calculation. I don't know how else we're going to be looking at that. So,
But you already have to.
right. Agreed.
For $750 for a vote.
Something that I've always thought was a really bizarre concept, starting out building a passive house and also having it evaluated under the HOT 2000 to step 5 was even for both systems, they have this concept where you say, okay, well, we have this hardline limit. We want to keep it to 15 kilowatts per meter square per annum. And you go, cool. And that's where we put the heating. And then you can also add cooling that goes to the same point. So somebody that designs a home to have no requirement for cooling hits 14 kilowatts and you go, thumbs up, that's great. Somebody else designs one and they say, oh, it's way easier if I just ratchet the crap out of my cooling load. And I have 14 and 14, that's 28. They both are considered to meet the same standard. One has double the energy. And it's a really bizarre concept that I think in certain ways it's almost like overlooked that if you were to go to Germany, they have this sort of innate logical measured process when they think about it. They wouldn't make that trade-off. They would say, well, that's silly. It doesn't make sense. You don't, if you're trying to save the energy, you have to look at everything at the same time. But over here, it's like, no. Whatever's going to make it the easiest thing for us to model through, whatever makes it cheaper. And some of the hardline limitations, if they were to bring them down and say, no, both of them need to be under this limit, it would immediately eliminate some of those ridiculous trade-offs. If you just said, well, no, if everything is at 20 max, well, you're not going to crank it to 14 and 14.
Yeah, the way I call it is eliminate the cheat codes. It's pretty much there's known ways to cheat the system, whether it's done purposefully or ignorantly. That's the big issue. And bottom line is, I think there's a really good FenCan Tech Talk. I think it was from Windor 2021, where you had Jim Larson, Gord Cook,
Oh, yeah.
Al
Al,
Ugalis. And the whole second half of that was ducting for cooling versus ducting for heating in a building, and how to properly design a building for proper cooling as well as heating through the same system is a completely different game altogether. And we're not even connecting the dots on a small room that is southwest facing is going to probably need twice as much ducting for cooling as it would need for heating. So who's doing that in the design concept? Nobody. I've never ever seen that done.
Oh.
So this whole concept of using these, what I call cheat codes as solutions to a problem, I only envision 10 years from now, there's going to be a huge new retrofit program. Like it's leaky condo 2.0 type of thing in a roundabout way, where you're going to get, like when I see a 14-story building get all new windows in it, and I find out it's all high heat gain glass, and we took out double pane 1980s glass, that's where you're going to start seeing, I think it was Al Ugalis who said to me, the worst glass combination you can ever do is Cardinal 180 with I-89 Surface 4. Not only are you letting in that heat, nothing's getting out. So it's, but there's a lot of glass selections that are being done for one purpose only and not for understanding the other consequences of it. I had the privileges of working in both new construction and renovation. So I think you get exposed to the occupant and the decision-making at different levels. And I can tell you that the existing homeowner buys windows very different than a developer does. Extremely different perspectives. And just go meet with a homeowner who's on the 3rd floor of a unit in White Rock on the hill that faces south. Look at the view in the summer. The blinds are closed, they can't look out, and it's brutal. You go to triple coat low E, and the blinds are wide open all summer long. So it's just it's an aspect of it that the more we keep talking about it, the more I think we'll start forcing change throughout the industry and go from there. So we all know it.
Well, I've been pretty encouraged to see there has been development on this conversation. But to your point, rebate programs like this are going to trigger a series of new requirements. We're probably going to still find ourselves 2-3 years out, developers making the same decisions, or architects really making the same decisions. I know I wrote an article for Fenestration Review before the tariffs started that was really to the point that the architects have to have the responsibility to make reasonable decisions for multifamily buildings. That was something I kept running into, is the architects found themselves handcuffed to the energy advisors making decisions about the overall design. That's insane. We can't possibly be having multifamily buildings that we're condemning to overheating because the architect has to stand back and say, I'm not the professional in the room.
Except the letters of assurance would differ. So
Yeah,
this,
but
this
if-
is where you start seeing certain things where there's no obligation for a professional to be an energy advisor if the architect chooses to take responsibility for someone else's design. So going on an education path to educate architects on energy advisors using high solar heat gain as a design solution and getting the architect to say, no, that's not something we're willing to incorporate into our building. Your cap is this.
But you've got places like City of Vancouver that essentially was putting their foot down on the final decision and saying, too bad. If it doesn't meet the energy model, then you can't finish this building. I had those experiences. That was, so that there is, you're totally right. And I think that's where we as FenCan, again, hopefully once the tariff thing kind of like lays out a little bit further, we can get back to some of the advocating for this kind of change, because we're going to see these buildings for the next handful of years, and as the energy efficiency as building, it is so much worse. Like I know some of the passive house buildings we saw at Innotech, it was rough. Like if you had to use 180 on like a really efficient building and it's sitting on the south face, those people cooking. It was miserable. So.
Passive house been written out of the next codes if it publishes the way it went through the last adjustment.
Yeah.
And what's written in here is if your summer design temperature is above 26 anywhere in Canada, it's whole house cooling. So, and to my original point, I've got to reinforce that if you actually build effectively at net zero, two truths. One, you don't get the building science right, it's leaky condo. Because you've lost all that empathy of protecting a whole other conversation, right? But if you get it right and you build it in the most cost-effective way to get to net zero kind of performance metrics, it's also the cheapest way to go. So you know, the education gets trumped by the fact that everybody's still looking for the cheapest way to build.
Yeah, on the cost side. So, and had a project recently with it's a step 3 building, big developer doing townhomes. The original proposed solar heat gain was 0.35 as a cap. The U value on a step 3 building, surprisingly enough, was 1.60. So like a code minimum window could still go into a step 3 building. And so the spec was a 1.60 U value with a 0.35 solar heat gain coefficient. When I educated the developer on the consequences of that window, because you're going to end up with a 0.45 by the time the supply comes, because it's going to go cardinal 180 for sure. And I asked how big are the windows? They're like 6 feet by 6 feet, 7 feet by 7 feet, because they're all that size now because of the views that everybody wants.
Yeah.
And I showed them that picture that I have of that window from Calgary that is in that tech talk where the homeowner put heat reflective blinds and it melted the window. The second solution was a 1.40 U value with a 0.26 solar heat gain coefficient. Which one's more expensive? The 1.4, right? Which one does the developer want to buy? The 1.6. So this is the predicament that we're in, is when you give two choices and one costs more, one costs less, without understanding the consequence, the developer will pick the cheapest one. But if you educate the developer of the consequence, good developers will make good decisions. I've seen it happen twice now on 2 projects with 2 very, very big wood frame developers in Vancouver. Ones that you would not think, they're building commodity townhomes, you would not think that they would pick the more expensive window, but they did. And I remember 25 years ago sitting across the table from the same people trying to convince them to put rain screen behind stucco. It's too much money, they said. Do we even think about that anymore?
I was told it was gonna be $80,000 a door, and I have personally ruined construction in Canada forever. I got sued for it, for that presentation in '94, after they made things better. They called it the MURBL.
Yeah.
Now it's code mandatory in the high moisture index, and it's soon to become code mandatory for all construction.
So
It's
that,
not called the MURBL anymore, so I'm gonna.
so the mistake I think most make is they think high solar heat gain is a thermal comfort issue and only a thermal comfort issue. If you make it a thermal, because air conditioning can solve potentially a thermal comfort issue, that's their argument, that we'll just put air conditioning in, that solves the problem. But if you actually show them the consequences of homeowner-driven actions, my wife used to work night shift, and we used to put this sort of foil thing in the window to make it blackout so she could sleep during the day. Well, that reflects the heat. It's going to cause that same issue. So when you, I believe there's something in the code that says a code item cannot require homeowner interaction in order to make it compliant. Well, the opposite has to occur. You can't put something in that a homeowner could modify that could cause it to be consequential. And that's where, programs like these and all the programs, to me, solar heat gain coefficient is actually a bit more important than U value, in my personal opinion. And I think we've been so fixated on the U value, we've lost sight of an actual important number. BC Housing, for example, in their guide spec, they have a range, I think it's a 0.27 to 0.32 solar heat gain as a range of how to write a spec for a window, but then they require a 0.5 visual light transmittance.
Yeah.
Do the logic on that. Doesn't work. And I've tried to educate them, and I brought it up over and over and over again, and it's still to this day. And I actually had a window company reach out to me going, we were just rejected on a project because we couldn't hit the 0.5 visual light transmittance when we met the solar heat gain coefficient. Well, nobody can, is my response. But the architect was stubborn and wanted it to be the way it was. So.
With respect though, it's not about you and solar heat gain coefficient. It's about finding the mix of those, the balance of those two that is the most effective to allow you to be efficient in the heating choice overall, meeting balance in your heating and cooling, and ask yourself where my next best marginal dollar is as a developer. Maybe it's in a U value improvement on the envelope. Maybe, and it turns out to be common currency, put another 5% effort into your air tightness. It never has diminishing return. Zero, and there's no diminishing return. It gives you and so when you're looking for the nickels at the end, we've gone to net zero. It puts an awful lot of pressure on that balanced approach, because any one sledgehammer is too expensive. The economy and the comfort and the durability and the longevity of that building is in hitting that fine balance between defendable building science and next best marginal dollar. And so heat gain versus this, balancing your raising against your mechanical cooling loads. All of this stuff leads to one thing, and you're held to greater account at net zero than you are than you.
There's two parts to that. Is BC Housing's logic for high visual light is to reduce lighting loads, but you end up with high solar heat gain, which results in people closing their blinds. So I actually went around and I took photographs of about 20 different BC Housing projects that I knew of, these modular buildings that they were all doing. And every single one in, I think it was February, had the windows were wide open. So they busted all the restrictors off, which is cool. And all the blinds were closed in February. So the logic behind some of the things that are going on is just not, it's not being thought through. And I think the actual issue that we probably need to address, and it goes back to that paper that Al did about turning solar heat gain coefficient. A coefficient is an unrelatable value that people, when you ask an architect or designer, what does a 0.4 feel like? And that's how I start out most of my presentations with architects, is if you don't know what a solar heat gain coefficient feels like, you're not allowed to spec it. Because to me, your job is to know the impact that that number is going to have. Now turn it into a relative heat gain in a watts per meter squared, and you can say this window, so I have a calculation I did, which is based on my house. I got 8 square meters of glazing on the south elevation of my house. And if I had high heat gain glass in it, it would be the equivalent of having 3 1,500 watt baseboard heaters on during
In the middle of summer.
In the middle of summer. You share that with a homeowner, with anybody, and they're going to make a very educated decision on what type of glass to go into that building. You give them a 0.45 solar heat gain coefficient, and it means nothing to them. So there's a bit of an issue. Jag, I think Jag, you've had a...
it's very interesting. And as I'm listening, I'm realizing how little I know. But one question to this room, and I would love to learn. Let's say one architect decides to build their building good and all the loads balanced, but with the density in BC growing and the buildings getting taller and the other neighboring buildings coming into play, does their design stay relevant 10 years from now? Because they would have designed based on a certain environment. And I think we have seen, Anton, with high reflective or 366, we have seen opposite side patio buildings or the patio furniture getting burned. So I think we are looking at the building and the occupant, which is great, because I think we want to serve the customer for whom we are building the building. But there is a community that the other buildings are going to be affected, especially think about Toronto downtown or Vancouver downtown. Buildings are getting taller. So I don't know. I'm just posing a question for this.
Google melted car. And there's, I think, a tower in the UK. I think it was, they call it the walkie-talkie tower. It's shaped like this. It melted a car across the street. So yeah, there's all these issues that come up, and I think it's the logic here goes into, and the presentation I do to architects all the time, I was saying to a group at the start here, is I created an equivalency of Miroslav's hierarchy of needs for designers. What's most important, and actually teaching them that you can't have 100% of everything. I think that's the real issue is that they're so focused on siloing everything. We need to have lots of visual light because it reduces our lighting load. Check. We need to reduce our solar heat gain because it reduces our check. So they're going into these things, and the classic case study is, what we worked on, Jagdeep, is the balance between life safety and acoustics. And an acoustical consultant wanting laminate glass, but a structural glazing engineering wanting tempered glass. Watch that fight, right? You think the argument, well, you could, but it's 4 times, it's a whole nother issue, but you think that argument would be pretty simple. Acoustics versus life safety. You can watch an architect not make a decision if it's on a topic like that. So, wooey?
A wildfire prevention.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
You got a type of glass in there, so you get a 8-minute rating, like the forest fire is going to be out.
Oh, so yeah.
I did everything on but we do know what does.
Yeah, just there is passive cooling research that NRCan has been doing for the last, I guess, that year now. That is a requirement for kind of what we're looking at for the 2025-2030 code cycle. That we didn't actually have the research in the background on how passive cooling was going to affect buildings. So that will be something coming, and I think that will actually play a pretty important role to your question.
Because at the end of the day, if you got a duration of about 26 degrees, doesn't matter what you do passively, you can't get 26 because you got to ventilate it.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's kind of off the table.
You think?
You mentioned about doing those calculations for the actual heat gain in real numbers, which is great. I did that once before for a presentation, and I can't remember. I don't feel like doing math on a regular basis. So I think that would be a fantastic thing to be able to access on like a FenCan website or something like that. If you had a fairly simple little calculator where you could plug in your glass area.
That would actually be cool because, being able to put it into common language is real in language that I used to do this exercise where quarterback versus receiver, right? Like if they're not speaking the same language, the ball's going the opposite direction. And real logical idea of like put it into a language that an architect can understand and that other people can look at. And I think the whole concept of the coefficients is what good is it anymore, right? So our market is moving more and more towards project specific for everything. So you have to start to ask the question is what is the relevance of certification values anymore based on gateway sizes when you're starting to pretty much talk about project specific outcomes and relative heat gain is, and as Al said, it comes out of the therm. Like the information is there. You just need to know how to pull it out and work with it type of thing. So One of the messages I do say to a lot of manufacturers is if you've been using Energy Star and the ER path as your primary compliance path for your product, if the cap does come to the 2025 BC bill or the NBC, you've only been getting there via the high heat gain glazing solution, it's probably offsetting how weak your frame is. And you'll be shocked at what'll happen pretty quickly when you can't use the ER path. So it's a bit of a heads up to start paying attention to your R&D on your frames. If you're working, there's a lot of people out there with 2 or 3 chamber PVC windows that when I've looked at them, the U value won't hit the target you want. So if the ER path goes away, that's going to be a bit of an issue.
Go ahead.
It
Kyle,
just-
Kyle's got one.
Yeah, but go ahead. I can.
I think, yeah, thank you. Maybe 2 quick questions and 1 comment. I like the thought of the calculator, maybe a color-coded heat map on it as well. I think it'll just tell the story a little bit better than numbers.
Visuals.
With this program and no commitment, are you going around, maybe a comment from you, Anton, are you going around putting your business card in people's doors? Are they calling you, or why are
Colleagues of
trying
mine
to-
just today were doing a presentation to a property manager. So our main pathway is we do a lot of depreciation reports. So anybody we've done a depreciation report, we pretty much are educating property managers on this program. Property managers then, when they go to a strata council meeting, will bring it up and basically say, is this something you want to do? We'll either get called into the strata council meeting to explain the process, and usually within 24 hours, we've got an approval to move forward and go from there. So it's not like single family where you have to have a really intense marketing campaign. It's all about how well you're networked into the property management industry, basically. So pretty straightforward. I am promoting, and what we promote at JRS is an envelope first approach. Be careful. I had a project in Whistler. A hotel there wanted to do its windows. We're all moving forward. And I said, oh, are you familiar with this program? They go, yep, we have it all done. They recommended heat pumps. I'm like, but you want to do windows? Yeah, we know. We're confused by that. So the energy consultant didn't even ask them what they wanted to do. They basically came up with a program to put heat pumps in, yet their number 1 priority was to deal with their windows because they had condensation issues and all this sort of stuff. So there are energy advisors out there that are heat pump first versus envelope first. So just from a perspective of the fenestration industry, you're really going to see more of the envelope consultants that are doing this work are going to be promoting envelope first upgrades before you start sizing heat pumps and putting those systems in. So there's a difference out there. So
Do you have another one?
yeah, HRE, yeah, heat recovery ventilation. Yeah. Yeah.
So calculator conversation, and I don't want to take too much from Jonathan Layton tomorrow, but we do have a size specific calculator that came out of an exercise with the City of Vancouver that we'll get to actually see tomorrow and walk through it. That is kind of, in my view, the first step to relative heat gain calculation. That calculator actually, with some basic math in the background, we could spit out that information from the size specific calculator. But phase 1 of the calculator we're at, I would say that's a phase 2 type of exercise, but we're really close. I would say the math in the background that you need in order to make that calculator work is really easy to kind of plug to the last bit of the relative heat gain conversation.
I think it's feasible, and you should involve Ontario Tech.
I agree.
They have calculators, they have an F280 calculator already. They have all that
Another
stuff. And
beer.
it's all ASHRAE 140. And then you got your 90.1 and everything else. But I would caution you too, if somebody's going to go on there and think, oh, that's good enough, I'll make a decision on it. I think you want it to be a powerful exploratory, but you still want people to go through the due diligence. So my suggestion would be to establish a series of representative building types, and then fix a bunch of things in there so that they can only, here's my longitude, latitude, or my city or whatever. And then they get to change one thing. And what you get is like a curve of response. If you just do that, it has diminishing return at this point. Maybe you haven't thought about that. So it spits out results based on changing the overall UA of the outside envelope if you're looking at solar heat gain, et cetera. So that you get a sense when you're looking at that, like, ooh, people are shocked when you show them how little influence any U value has on cooling loads. It's almost non-existent. It's just lost in the conversation at heat gain. So if you do it that way and put a big caveat on there, can't rely on this as definitive, but it would give them a tool to start going, well, I think that's a rabbit hole over there. I kept plugging numbers into 10 different buildings and I'm not getting anywhere closer to where I need to go. Maybe I need to think about this.
I think we're good.
Wrap it up. Yeah.
All right.
So just so everybody knows, my bias towards anti-high solar heat gain is because I grew up in a house with a west-facing bedroom window, second floor, and I spent my summer sleeping in a tent. So if you want to know why I say what I say, it's because I lived it as a kid, and I see the design solution to fix the problem, and yet we are designing the problem in today's systems. So we have an opportunity to speak up. So.
All right. Thanks, Anton. Okay, give me 2 seconds, but I do have a couple of things that I want to comment on, because I always do. Google Homes with no windows. Not probably a hot topic in this room, but there are people now building homes using flat screens with cameras instead of windows. No solar gain problems there. Yeah. So you can be miserable raining like it is today, and you could have a beautiful beach out your window. The other one, now I got to figure out how to make this thing work. Whenever somebody talks about BC Hydro, I can't help but feel a little frustration. I'm in a late 70s home over on Vancouver Island, dual glaze, mostly dual glaze clear wood windows. I replaced a few. Vaulted ceilings, 2x4 walls with some insulation on the outside that the original homeowner did. All electric heat, electric baseboards, and electric hot water. My wife and I are the only two people in the house, except for some pets that don't worry about heating and cooling so much. And in the wintertime, I hit tier 2 in the first week of my billing cycle. So I go from 10 cents a kilowatt hour to 15 cents in the first week. So I thought, how can that possibly be? Like, it's just two of us. You know, we're turning off lights. You know, I've got rooms shut off, baseboards not going. I was like, why on earth am I hitting this tier 2 and my bill's ridiculous? So I started asking questions of people at BC Hydro. Electrical use is averaged across every home in BC, meaning that my all-electric clean house is being averaged against all the other homes using natural gas for heat and hot water and their electrical use. Makes no sense. I reached out to the BC Utilities Commission, and that was a pointless effort. That's simply the way it is, and that's the way it is. They have no plans of changing that to encourage people to be more electric. Anyway, I just like to rant about it whenever somebody mentions BC Hydro. It's extremely frustrating. 2 people. Makes me crazy. Okay, I got to figure out how to shut this down. Tanya Ratzlaff is the Director of Strategic Relations with HPSC. I just got to figure out how to get rid of this. Do you want me to move the slides for you? If it's, yeah, okay. Oh. Hold it down.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Great. Sounds good. Well, thank you, Terry. As Terry mentioned, my name is Tanya Ratzlaff. I'm here from the Home Performance Stakeholder Council. Really grateful for the chance to be part of this meeting. I've been enjoying listening. I am not coming from a technical background, so I've already learned a few things here today. But my role is at a nonprofit called the Home Performance Stakeholder Council, which I'm going to share a little bit more about here today. But I'm curious, I know Anton briefly mentioned us, but maybe aside from that, or if you do remember him mentioning, show of hands if you've heard of the Home Performance Stakeholder Council. Nice. Okay, a decent amount. That's nice to hear. We always go into a room assuming that we're going to have varying degrees of it. We've been working over the years to kind of build our brand awareness. So because we have a big long name, we do go by our acronym of the HPSC. So HPSC, or Home Performance Stakeholder Council. And then my role as Director of Strategic Relations, it's just sort of a fancy way of saying we have a small team and it's all hands on deck. And so our Managing Director, Jovan Chima, who wasn't able to be here today, I'm sort of his right-hand person. And so I am stepping in to introduce our organization, one of our flagship initiatives. And I really like the vibe of your meeting so far where it's pretty open-ended. So if Terry is supportive of it, we can do questions as we go, or we can leave them for the end. Either one works for me. I think Adrian's the one running around with the mic, so whatever he prefers. Great. Thank you. All right. So on the screen there, you can see a little bit of formatting issues, but we have a few different things for sort of the agenda of today. So I'll introduce our organization. Then I'll introduce what we call our flagship initiatives. That's the Home Performance Contractor Network. Talk a little bit about the capacity we have in that network, some quality assurance steps we call contractor management that we're taking. And then we have a little plug to invite you all to our upcoming event as well. So let's dive in. There's a lot of information on the screen there, but I'm just going to kind of highlight the key takeaways here. So from the top down, our focus as an organization is on home performance. And thankfully, I think a lot of people in the room know what that is, but we have this slide because most of the time we say that to people and it's blank stares. But home performance is the science and the practice of either building or improving homes based on like a whole home approach or the house as a system concept. So that would very much include the envelope first approach. And so when we focus on this topic, we are looking at things like the building envelope, mechanical systems, occupant behavior, environmental conditions. And this is all in the effort of trying to make homes as safe, comfortable, energy efficient, and durable as possible. You could also say resilient. I know there was talk of wildfire prep and things like that. So another situation where that comes in. Our role in the sort of center left of the screen there, as I mentioned, we're a nonprofit organization. I'll talk a little bit more about our funders in a moment, but that allows us to have some level of not being biased. Of course, there's always going to be some bias in there with our funders, but that's our role. And so we strive to connect industries. So folks just like yourself in this room, it could be contractors, manufacturers, suppliers, with other elements of sort of the industry as a whole. So government and utility programs, rebate programs for sure. We'll be talking about that in a moment. So we are not the technical experts. We have some professional training in building science to make sure that, you know, we understand the world that we're working in, but our background specifically in terms of our team is going to be more in, you know, program management and project management and facilitation and stakeholder engagement. So we're trying to fill the niche to help folks like yourself and government utility programs, you know, legislators work together and kind of have more productive conversations. That's some of our goals. And then we focus right now currently just in BC. We have hopes and dreams and ideas and allies across the province, or sorry, across the country rather. But right now, because our funding comes from BC, that's where our focus is. I should also mention that we fill a pretty niche role. So we focus specifically on residential retrofits. So residential mostly being single family homes, although sort of like small scale MURBs would come into play. But I think, Anton, the kind of MURBs you were speaking of currently sits a little outside of our purview. And that just has to do with the history of how we were formed. So briefly, our organization was formed when industry, contractors, manufacturers, suppliers, and government and utility groups came together and said, we need to find a way to tackle this beast of retrofitting homes in BC. You know, we have a building code that tells us what we need to do for new construction, but what about existing homes? And at the time, the focus and the impetus was, well, let's start on the smaller scale. Let's start on single family homes. So hopefully some potential and growth to kind of expand this niche, but for now, that's where our focus is at. And then briefly, just to wrap up this slide, you can see that our specific focus is to increase the supply and demand of qualified home performance service providers. And we want to do that by supporting the general market growth, build capacity through training, for example, and then support quality workmanship. So the work we do is at the bottom of the screen there. We engage with industry. We do that through a variety of mechanisms, which I'll introduce in a moment. We do produce some contractor resources, although we're not very heavy into doing that. We actually prefer to point to other, for example, industry associations like FenCan Canada and say, hey, let's not reinvent the wheel when it comes to sector specific training resources. Let's point to those that are already existing. We have in the past just tried to fill any gaps where we felt like that house is a system approach was missing. But again, industry is really already moving light years ahead and kind of building that into their own sector training anyway. And then finally, we do act as advocates from industry to government. But again, because we're facilitators, we do often find ourselves not advocating from government back to industry, but trying to open up those lines of communication, even just to get answers to some of these stubborn questions that seem to go unanswered when some folks try and get them answered individually. And then finally, we have our flagship initiative, the Contractor Network, which I will talk quite a bit about in length. So we'll move on to the next slide for now. All right, so I mentioned we are a small but mighty team. We are a nonprofit, so we're governed by a board of directors, which is great because that helps bring in some of those technical insights that our team doesn't necessarily have in and of our staff. So at the top there, you can see some examples of our board members, and on the bottom left, we also have some additional board advisors as well. And then that small but mighty team is on the far right-hand side. So we have 5 full-time staff and 2 part-time staff members. And then in the middle, that's reflecting some of our kind of working groups. So we have our funding committee. So those are our funding partners. So again, we can't say we're completely unbiased because you'll see right away we have BC Hydro, Fortis, and the provincial government as funders. So naturally, there's going to be a level of give and take when it comes to having our funding come from those groups. So we're really happy that we've begun diversifying. We have Van City, which is a credit union that's come on, and we are constantly working on diversifying our funding even more so we can become kind of more and more independent over time. And then I'll speak a little bit more to the other items next to the funding partners. It says Industry Advisory Committee and Sector Councils. This slide is a closer look at what goes on there. So from the beginning of our organization, we have worked with what we call sector councils. So those are groups of people who are currently working in their sector. So we have HVAC, insulation, windows and doors, general retrofit, and energy advisors. So for example, in the window and door sector council, you'll have some contractors, you'll have industry association reps, you'll have manufacturers on there, and we meet quarterly to discuss issues that are relevant to their sector, relevant to home performance, and then specifically relevant to any of the work that our organization is doing. So this could be specific to our contractor network. A lot of the time we'll have advocacy items come up. So we will facilitate conversations, probably much like FenCan Canada also supports as well. And then we might work together and, draft a letter. Again, we try really hard to stay in the line that we're best suited to, which is home performance. So a lot of the times we actually will work with other partners. We'll work with FenCan Canada or we'll work with FGIA BC to say, hey, we had this thing come up in a sector council meeting. Who is the best group to sort of advocate and bring this forward? And we try and focus on building allyship rather than reinventing the wheel. So a lot of the time, historically, our sector council sessions then have been very focused on improving our contractor network and getting really specific advocacy back to those rebate program partners that we've talked about. And then in the last couple of years, we created what we call an industry advisory committee. So this is a committee one step above the sector councils, where they'll have a representative from each sector council, and then they can kind of serve on a similar level as our board of directors. So for example, we just updated our strategy at the end of 2023. We published it early 2024. We had this strategy document. It used to be called a roadmap. It was wonderful. It had a lot of actions for us. And it was just time for us to kind of revamp it and revisit it. So we as staff kind of took our first step at, okay, let's revisit and let's kind of organize and what do we think strategy might look like? And then we brought it to that industry advisory committee and our board of directors, and we asked for their strategic insights. So in that way, yes, you have a team who's not technical experts. We're good at organizing and managing and facilitating, but we were able to make sure that we're always bringing in those strategic insights from industry, and so that our organization really continues to be a for industry, by industry nonprofit as much as possible. Nobody's perfect, right? We're always working on improving. So obviously this is going to be a little hard to read. We do have this on our website if you're interested in learning a little bit more, but it just breaks down our organization's work into 4 themes. So one theme is codes, bylaws, permits, and regulations. Another is consumer education and marketing. The third is industry support and workforce development. And finally, we have HPCN operations. That's our contractor network, which we'll talk about a bit more. And then you can see in dark blue, we have advocacy items, and in light blue, we have action. So that just gives you a good sense of how our organization kind of breaks down work between where are we just advocating for other people to make change and we're kind of the voice of industry, and then where are some actions that we can actually take. And this is what we call a living document. So we update it every year and we add new items as they come on. Yes, Adrian.
All right. So 2 things. First, we've spent too much time in meetings together for me to call, not to call BS on the fact that you know a little bit about our industry.
Thank you.
So,
I've tried to educate myself.
Just going to start there.
Thank you, Adrian.
And then second, just for this group, I made a promise to Brady, the coordinator for HPSC. I've had to step back from my education role at HPSC. Unfortunately, I've been maxed out here at FenCan, but if there is anybody interested, I promised that I would at least bring it up to you guys if you want to participate at HPSC. I feel like we did good work. Like there was a lot of great conversations there for the last, 6-7 years that we participated. So yeah, anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adrian. Yeah, so huge shout out for, I'm going the wrong way. I just wanted to highlight again, Sector Council. There's always an open door. So thank you, Adrian. There's always an open door for new members on our Sector Councils. And Adrian's mentioning Brady, my colleague who helps run the Sector Councils. Her and Jovan have done a great job in the last few years, just bringing a little more organization into them as well. So they've really helped shape our flagship initiatives. They've helped shape a lot of work. You get some really meaningful actions that come out of it. And it's a really fantastic way for, again, I think, Anton, it was you who said, if you have any particular frustrations with a rebate program or with other kind of, government legislation or lack of legislation, we are attempting to be that place for industry to come and say, tell us your concerns. We try and find organized and meaningful ways to do it. And so what we found works is having these sector councils. So it doesn't mean that the only way you can share your voice with us is by joining a sector council. But if you're particularly passionate, it's a really effective way for us to have your consistent feedback, kind of be able to work with you on something and come back to it. It is a volunteer opportunity, but we try and respect your time with 4 1-hour or so meetings every year. Yes.
What home designers fit in here?
Great question. So we are just residential retrofits. So we don't work with any new construction specifically. Obviously, if you're a contractor who does both, that's fine and you're very welcome. So for the retrofit landscape, the closest to what I imagine you're thinking of with a home designer would be the general retrofit sector. So those are contractors in a retrofit setting that take on like a general contractor role. So they might be subbing out some of these specific tasks. They might employ all of their employees for different ones. They might be kind of taking on the role of the energy advisor and then project managing it. And we actually are just about to open our contractor network for these folks as well. I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment.
Because
No retrofit should go without drawings, and pretty soon it's going to be a requirement as permits hit them.
Mm-hmm.
So where's the representation of the people drawing the pictures right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So perhaps I'll continue on and I'll speak a little bit about that contractor network because it's probably going to get into a lot of the meat and potatoes of what's all behind those comments. So thanks for your question. All right, so without further ado, I keep alluding to this flagship initiative, and it really goes hand in hand with our organization. To talk about the HPSC, you also really want to talk about the HPCN, We are aware that they are both long names and acronyms. We do our best. So sometimes I'll just refer to it as the network if that helps us kind of wrap our heads around it. So another show of hands here. Has anyone heard of the Home Performance Contractor Network, or the HPCN, or the network you must join to get rebates? Yeah, nice. Okay, is anyone in this room a member of our network? Yes, thank you. I knew I saw some familiar names on the name tags. That's great. So the HPCN is a central network or database of retrofit contractors in BC that have met certain accreditation and training criteria. So accreditation criteria, meaning their business itself needs to provide us with proof that they have insurance, that they offer a 1-year labor warranty, that they have business licenses, just your standard things that if the average contractor is on the up and up, it's not going to be a problem, but that we've already caught some bad apples doing nefarious things with. So an important step. And then the really sort of impactful piece of the network are the training requirements. And those are specific to each sector. So I'll go over that in a moment of what it is for the window and door sector. What I really wanted to highlight here by way of introduction is that our network is attempting to support capacity building for retrofit contractors and quality workmanship. One of the sort of highlights or benefits or struggles, depending on how you look at it, of our network is that we have partnered very closely with provincial rebate program partners. So the province of BC, BC Hydro, FortisBC, and also Pacific Northern Gas up in the north. And they require homeowners to hire contractors from our network to access their rebates. So by being a contractor in our network, you're essentially opening up the door for your customers to get access to their rebates. So because of this connection, we are sometimes mistaken for the rebate programs. And so we just like to take a moment to clarify that. We absolutely work very closely with them. We also advocate to them and we facilitate with them. So we have no issue hearing concerns and feedback about the programs. We're always happy to take note of that and pass those along, but we are separate. We do not make the decisions on the rebate programs as much as maybe we would like to be the ones making those decisions sometimes. But we work very closely with the rebate programs and there's a lot of benefits there. We'll talk a little bit about some of those benefits when it comes to quality assurance. But like I said, one of the sort of biggest incentives to join our contractor network is that your customers can get access to the rebate programs there. So as I mentioned, there are a couple sectors that our rebate network is not actually currently open for yet, but it's coming very soon. So since we launched in 2021, our network has been open for the window and door sectors. They were actually the very first network to launch. It was sort of like a soft launch. So they got to try it out that way. And then HVAC and insulation sectors have been going strong since then. We have been on a journey to get funding so that we can launch some additional sectors as well. So we're really happy to announce that we have that funding now and we'll have energy advisors and then general retrofit sectors open. Now, to clarify, if you are a contractor in BC and you offer any or all of these services, you can join. So even though you're a general retrofit contractor, if you have employees that install windows, you can join the window sector. That's no problem. When we launch the general retrofit sector, that's going to be more specific to that whole home design process. And there are a lot of contractors that are breaking into this niche of homeowner education and hand-holding through the process. And so that's more what the general retrofit sector is going to reflect. At any time, if your company offers multiple services, you can join for each and any of those sectors. We do not have a membership fee. We're very happy that we've been able to manage our funding so far, that we don't have a membership fee, so that can be kind of a low bar to entry. And then aside from that sort of big carrot, which I mentioned of rebate eligibility, we have some other benefits of joining our network. One of the big ones is subsidized training. So again, you don't have to pay to join our network. We will tell you that you're required to take certain training to join our network, but then we actually reimburse you. So 100% of the course costs are reimbursed. And then we also give you a wage contribution. It's a standard calculation that we have. I think it usually ends up being, so for the window and door sector, we would pay you back for your training and give you your wage contribution. So it's going to be around $400 that you're getting back from us. As of right now, we have some exciting updates coming of some additional training options that are coming through. So that's one of the other benefits of the Home Performance Contractor Network. If you're the kind of contractor who is looking to get your customers rebates, this would be a great reason to join. If you sort of either way are interested in supporting training for your team, we have heard and we hear that it's tight to take people off of jobs to get them to take training. So we're really happy that we can not only pay you back, but then also give you at least a gesture of a wage contribution to reflect the time that you had to commit in for your employee to take that training. Other than rebate program eligibility, which I've mentioned, you also get to use our HPCN logo. So we're sort of building brand awareness. I think in the future, we're going to be making a bigger push alongside our program partners to build that brand awareness so that when homeowners see a seal like that, they can understand that it reflects a certain level of accreditation or qualification that your company's gone through. And then finally, the other sort of big incentive is if you are looking for new business, then as a member in our network, you do get posted on a search tool. And that search tool lives in a few different places. It lives on the Better Homes BC website. So that's going to be the main landing page for your average homeowner that's looking for rebates. The provincial government runs it, but it has all the information from BC Hydro and Fortis and P&G as well. And then we have the same search tool reflected on our website. And we're currently working with Google to have our search tool and our affiliation sort of pop up as like a special little feature when you search for contractors so that contractors in our network would be highlighted in sort of an extra level here. All right, let's get into some of the juicy things I know that this group will have some questions about. So just as a way of sharing a little bit more about these rebate programs that require our membership, for the window and door sector, there is actually just one rebate program right now that requires membership. For our other sectors like HVAC and insulation, there's a few different programs. We continue to advocate and work with our program partners to increase that. The good news is one of the major rebate programs in the province right now, the Energy Savings Program, I can't share too many more details, but they're making even more investments into this program. It's coming very soon. And all indicators suggest that the support for windows and doors will continue to remain there. So what I really like to highlight about this program is it is income-based. But if you can see on the screen there, it's showing what the different income level tiers are to qualify. And even for a two-person household, if you go over to the far right, the highest threshold is still $124,000. So for context, my parents live in a single family home in Abbotsford. They're both retired. And so they would qualify somewhere between income level 2 and income level 3 to get support for their project. And in terms of what the dollar amounts mean, it means you could be getting up to $9,500 per home. Now, I have heard that this number is probably low. I don't know what folks in this room feel like. When you're doing a window retrofit, is $9,500 going to be enough to replace all the windows that you want to replace? That's for income level 1 and 2. It doesn't apply to income level 3. So these are the kind of situations where, again, we are not the rebate programs. I didn't make this decision, but we can absolutely collect and gather feedback. We do have technical contacts in these rebate programs that we speak with that are informed and, they're aware of technical specs. But as I can appreciate being in a room full of technical experts here, there's going to be different opinions, and somebody who's working for government and technical might not have as up-to-date information as possible. So again, this is sort of the level of insight I can share on the rebate programs right now. Happy to gather and collect feedback as always. But I can affirm that there continues to be support from the province and from the energy utilities to keep these rebate programs going. But we have historically seen a little bit of a hesitancy. Again, I think, Anton, you mentioned this, for window supports, because the government and utilities are looking for energy savings, and they have seen that coming highest from their HVAC and insulation opportunities. So, yes, Anton.
I want to make sure we get you.
The way it was explained to me, like before all of this existed, I remember being at a meeting at BC Hydro, and they said their programs are designed to convince people to replace equipment before it fails. So if you have a hot water tank that's 70%, 80% efficient, they want you to put a tankless system in that's 98% efficient before the tank fails. They said people replace windows because there's more value in replacing windows than just energy. And that's why windows have always been a second thought for all of the programs.
Yeah.
The last, I would say, 5 years, my experience is windows have been treated on an equal level as equipment. So we've seen a transition or a shift over to it, but that's always been the mindset of the utilities when it comes down to it. And I think your program has brought to light, since that program's been in, has brought to light the value of envelope first.
That's great.
And if you think about this in harmony with the energy step codes, it's creating a change in conversation about, I always like to say, put a sweater on before you turn the heat up.
Yes.
Kind of attitude. And that's why I think windows and insulation will be there for, the long term. So
Absolutely. Thanks, Anton. And I think a sort of connecting point here that I wanted to mention in terms of rebate programs as well is that government and the utilities, to an extent, they're also a product of the political environment. So we just had an election here in BC in the fall, and even though our government stayed in, they obviously understood that the confidence was a little shaken. And so our program partners, who we meet with on a bi-weekly basis, I meet with a representative from Clean BC, from BC Hydro, and from Fortis and PNG. And they let us know, yeah, we technically have a new government in, like there's new ministers, and they get new letters written to them that give them new directive. And so while I'm not suggesting we all have to be okay with that, it is helpful to remember that's why programs change. And that's why sometimes the wind blows and suddenly they just care about heat pumps and they don't care about windows anymore. So that's another perk of having an organization who is also allies with other industry associations who were here for the longer haul, and we can try and keep that kind of advocacy going in the long run. So our commitment is always to advocate and then keep our network as informed as possible. So we have heard that there are going to be some upcoming program changes. It doesn't sound like bad news, it just sounds like changes, and change can be frustrating sometimes, but we'll do our best to get that information out as quickly as we can. So I'll have my contact information at the end here. If you're not connected with our organization, if your work overlaps with us, I strongly recommend you get connected. We have a newsletter. You could reach out to us if you're interested in joining a sector council, and these are some great ways to stay involved. Great. All right, so that's all I'll mention for rebate programs for now. I'll kind of wrap up this section on our contractor network by just briefly introducing what the actual process is of joining our network. I'm not going to go over this in detail. I'll just mention what you're seeing on the slide here is a breakdown of how it is a company that joins our network. It's not an individual person or installer, it's the company. And then it is the individual employees or installers who take the training. So you might have one company, and if you have 6 installers, we would encourage you to train all of your installers. We have training subsidies available for that. And then your company provides obviously the business documentation. And then it's both the company and the people doing work for you that have been trained that we sort of manage through our ongoing contractor management process, which I'll share a little bit more about. In terms of what this qualifications or this training is that I've been alluding to, it's specific to each sector. So for the window and door sector, you can see the process broken up into 2 sections here. So you start on the left, you submit your application, we go through some reference checks process, and then you get to the qualifications section. So I think there's a laser pointer on there. There we go. So the qualifications section is broken down here, and it shows you approximately how much time is required. This qualifications process, well, actually the whole process, but specifically the training, this was designed and developed by our Window and Door Sector Council. So this was not me and my colleagues sitting down saying, what do I think that these window and door folks should take? It was the sector councils coming together and discussing and debating, mostly agreeing. Sometimes it doesn't always lead to 100% agreement, but coming to some kind of consensus around this is the kind of training that we want contractors to take before they're out there in the world doing window retrofits. We have always referred to the training we have here as our fundamental training, because at the time our Window and Door Sector Council was being supported through this work, we didn't have funding to create any advanced training. So they really got the short end of the stick at the time. Terry was part of that process. It was frustrating. You know, we were told there was a rebate program coming, and then it ended up coming like a year later. So we did this whole big rush, and it left our sector council and our staff very unsatisfied. So we're very happy to share that we now have our advanced training coming as well, which will be added very soon to these training requirements. And I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment. So once those training requirements are complete, that's when we need the business documents. Again, very paperworky, just your business licenses, proof that you offer 1-year labor warranty, have insurance, and your WorkSafe clearance letter. Again, you might be surprised how many fraudulent activities we've caught just going through these processes. Right? There you go. That's a good point. So we've seen, Photoshop documents and people suggesting that they'll work all over the province in every single community. And we're like, well, where are your business licenses? And they don't even know what is required of them, or they try and convince us, no, I don't need a license to work in XYZ. So even these little things that for what we, would call the good guys can be really frustrating for you to have to provide this paperwork. Our response is, of course it is, because when you're doing the right thing, it's always frustrating to have to jump through hoops. But our sector councils, when we started all of this, said there are enough bad apples out there giving our industry a bad reputation. We want you to do these steps. So as long as we continue to hear that kind of feedback from our sector councils, we continue to have these sort of requirements baked into our application process. So this is what it currently is. As I mentioned, we have some advanced training coming. So I thought I would briefly speak to this a little bit more. So as I mentioned, when the Window and Door Sector Council first started with us and were able to launch, we just didn't have the funding. And to be very frank, we didn't have the support from our program partners as well. And so they sort of got put to the back of the stove. And we're really happy. We fought really hard to find funds to be able to work with them to create this advanced training. And we're really happy that it's coming now. So here are the highlights. The training that was decided by the sector councils for their sort of advanced level, they decided on this 60-hour micro-credential that is developed by Okanagan College, and that has industry advisory opportunities all throughout it. So basically our sector council, other members are able to get in there and give their feedback as Okanagan College is producing this. It's going to be a blend of virtual or online learning, and then also have that hands-on experience. So people are actually in a shop environment and touching products and tools. And the idea is that this will eventually become mandatory for our network, but there's a huge caveat here that it needs to be able to be offered throughout the province of BC. We care a lot about access to our contractors in northern areas and central areas, the cost of traveling to come take training at Okanagan College or other places. And so while it's the goal that eventually this is a new step of our network that people must take this training. It's going to be launched as early as May 2025, and it will start as a sort of recommended training option. Maybe we can come up with a way to highlight in our search tool, like, hey, these companies have been able to take the full training, and then it would give time for Okanagan College to work with its allies around the province. They've already started those conversations so that it can be offered in at least one kind of place per area around the province. Yeah, I think there's a mic coming for you.
That'd be great if we could have that. If you could have that for people in northern BC that want to add to it, because I still have a few of our branches that need to do the training. So having to go to, down to the Okanagan would be a
big lift, right? Yeah. Absolutely. And expensive. And we are planning to have training subsidies available. But if you have to travel from the north to the Okanagan College, that uses up all the training subsidies. So absolutely. Basically, industry and the HPSC have said it's non-negotiable. We won't make this mandatory until it can be offered in. We break the province down into 4 areas just for planning purposes. So we have Lower Mainland, Vancouver Island, and then North and Central. So at a bare minimum in those 4 places, 1 location, and then ideally more because North and Central, like those are very broad areas still.
Yeah, like if you could bring CNC College in Prince George on, I'm pretty sure you could make something work there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for your feedback. Are you from Prince George? Brady says to say hi. She let me know that you were going to be coming. So nice to see you. Wonderful. So just in terms of any kind of additional comments on here, you might be interested to know how this process came about. We do not hand over training to one organization. Like we didn't pick Okanagan College and say, hey, we like you, create a training course and we'll point to you and say it's mandatory. We try and do a democratic process, I guess you could say. So the sector council put together a list of learning objectives. We also call it like a gap analysis report. They said, these are the skills that we want retrofit contractors to have. And then they put that out into a sort of like a request proposal, and that was shared with various organizations. Those organizations chose to submit if they wanted to, and then our sector council reviewed those proposals and basically had some conversations and then selected the one they liked. So that's how this micro-credential was selected. Our training always has opportunities to involve. What we try and make really clear to everyone is we follow the lead of industry, and we do that mostly through our sector council. So that's why if you're really passionate about what kind of training people should be taking in BC for retrofits, it's a great place to get involved. I will also take this as a moment to acknowledge that we try and offer other opportunities as well, like a survey, one-on-one calls, that kind of thing. We've had historically a really challenging time getting responses for something like a survey. So we're doing the best we can. We're doing what we find works, and we're really open to feedback and other ideas of other ways we could gather more people's opinions. If, for example, you can't commit to a sector council, but you would really like to share something, we do take that into consideration, and we're always open to more feedback as well. All right, I will move along. Terry, am I doing okay for time here? 10 minutes, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to move through, but let me know if you have any more questions regarding that training. Just wanted to share a few numbers about our capacity in the HPCN. This is a question that typically comes up. I've told you about our network, why it exists, what the benefits are, how you can join. And then typically some questions will start coming in of like, well, what's the size of this thing? So we do put all of our sectors on screen just so you can get a sense of the breakdown. And then of course, I've also highlighted windows and doors specifically for our meeting here today. So on the far right-hand side, that's the number of members that we have for each sector. So again, those are companies, and then each company could have more than one individual and trained installer. And then we do also put the number of registrants in the middle. We just like to highlight the fact that our contractor network is always growing as well. So you might notice right away that windows and doors has the lowest number. That can definitely be chalked up to the fact that there are more HVAC rebate programs, and generally they have higher incentive amounts. So we have always had really high participation in the HVAC sector. Insulation is actually not too far off from windows and doors. That's probably another reflection of there are more insulation rebate programs than windows and doors as well, but their values are also a bit lower. So you could look at this a few different ways. Why is participation so low? But we have also looked at this as an opportunity to talk with our program partners about requiring some of their other window rebate programs to require HPCN membership, because basically these numbers are being strongly driven by that one energy savings program. And when we look at the growth over years, so this is the past few years, and it's broken down. This is just window and door members and registrants. And then we break it down into those 4 large areas of the province that I mentioned. So this was last year. We ended with 103. In 2023, we only had 63. And in 2022, we only had 27. So we actually are seeing a huge growth in membership in almost all their areas. The Lower Mainland's a little bit slow. And again, we've seen much higher growth in our HVAC sector, where they have more rebate programs that require our membership. So we definitely see rebate program membership as a big driver. And of course, we're also continuing to explore other benefits and other drivers. Some of the changes we're going to be making to our search tool and how we can promote businesses, I think that's really going to help. So, all right. Quickly, I will also just dive into a little bit about what we call contractor management. This is our quality assurance protocols and commitment. So aside from just creating a network of contractors who have taken training, which is fantastic, and that's a great step, but a lot of people, contractors usually want to know, what are you actually doing to investigate them? Like, how do you know that they're following through on your training? Well, as a reminder, we work very closely with the rebate program partners, and they actually conduct project-specific site visits. It's a random percentage of all of the rebate applications. It typically works out to being about 10%, but it sort of depends exactly where it is. And if they have concerns about a particular contractor, then they might do multiple site inspections for those folks. So the rebate program partners are already doing that sort of hands-on site inspections. Our focus is on the long-term quality assurance and workmanship of the contractors in our network. So we are overall trying to monitor, are they doing quality work? Are they following the training that they went through in our network? Are they committed to our code of conduct, which is that was created by our sector councils, pretty standard. You know, you must be an ethical business person, and you must put customer service first, and you must give them the benefit of rebates and things like that. These are the sorts of things that we want to know are happening long term. We are not trying to fix particular projects, whereas the rebate programs, when they're doing their site-specific visits, they might be trying to sort out some issue with the homeowner to make sure that they can get their rebate, or that their heat pump works, or their windows were installed. We are looking at, do we keep this contractor in our network, or do they need to do some sort of remediation or disciplinary work before they can stay in our network and keep working with other people? So these are the kinds of things we monitor. We do this through a variety of ways. We do have homeowner complaints. There's a form on our website that people can fill out. We do hear from homeowners. That's very helpful. We do sort of manual audits where we check to see if the trained person is still working for that company. We also will go back to them and say, hey, you told us you have 20 people working on retrofits, yet you only have one person who took the training. You're going to need to take some more training, kind of randomly checking them like that. And then finally, and very importantly, we do have an information sharing agreement with the rebate program partners. So when they have done their site visits, we can get that information back to understand if there was a quality workmanship issue. And then we can also make requests. We can say, you know, we heard a complaint about this homeowner from this homeowner. We didn't really get a lot of solid evidence, so we don't feel confident, you know, telling them they need to retake the training or suspending them or something, but hey, could you do a site visit and let us know if anything comes back? And we're really ramping up our collaboration efforts with them, and we've been catching a lot of contractors who are consistently having the same installation problems or consistently committing some level of fraud or kind of nefarious activity. So that's really ramping up for us. In terms of the numbers that we get for having issues with contractors, this is just a snapshot in time. So it's not actually showing a like record over the past year or so. But, and excuse the red rectangle's a little off, but if you look at windows and doors, again, because our membership is so low compared to the other sectors, we also see a low amount of quality workmanship and code of conduct complaints coming through there. So right now we only have one member who has been paused. A paused member is somebody who's basically been given a chance to, hey, you're going to need to retake your training, or you're going to need to put a business plan together for us. But once you do that, we'll let you back into our network. This is a learning opportunity for you. It's almost always our first step. There are situations though where either if they continue to have problems with us, or something really serious has happened, like a safety issue or a fraud issue. This hasn't happened in windows and doors yet, but like we had someone Photoshop a gas furnace ticket. So like that's really, that's not okay. Then we will go to what we call a suspension, and that's a punitive measure, a slap on the hand. Like, you have now been locked out of membership. You still have to retake this training or do XYZ, but even if you did it tomorrow, you are still suspended until this date in the future as that punitive measure. And then it would kind of escalate from there. In terms of the types of issues we see with windows and doors, it's pretty straightforward. If it's a quality workmanship issue, we're just consistently seeing them not following the training, not following the best practice guide. They're just doing a really improper job of insulating around the windows. Usually what we find in that case is it wasn't a trained installer on site. So that's just a great opportunity for us to catch a company that needs to have more of their employees trained. Yes.
I hope you're not talking about insulation in the rough opening around the window. That's counterproductive and non-code conforming.
We had a long conversation, the advanced techniques about that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we lost that battle. But
Stay tuned tomorrow and I'll show you what goes on in the rough opening, and then you tell me if you want to stick anything.
Yeah, that's perfect. Like I said, I'm not the technical expert. We follow our best practices training. So
No, it's not.
Spray foam is an option in the best practice.
Yeah, but that's not insulation. The spray foam that you use there has no R value. It's not defined as insulation, and there's no accommodation till the 25 for even half pound open cell. Different thing. That's an air tightness strategy, just like you're using rod and caulk at best, and it's questionable if it works. But no.
I hate to tell you this, but in the best practice guide, they talk about putting insulation in the rough opening cavity, and it was something that we had conversations and we suggested, at least from our side, don't do that.
don't
But
do that. Okay. Well, that's great feedback for me.
yes.
Mhm.
No,
Anyway.
it's 100% unsupportable, wrong, counterproductive, and dangerous. But, you know.
Are you sure, Murray?
No, I think he's got some questions about this.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, not
No,
quite sure.
Helpful. I hate to do the old pass off, but it is not myself who works directly with the sector councils, but Adrian, it sounds like you're kind of up on. There have been conversations.
We
so.
did.
Yeah. No, it's really, like I said, I'm not really in the loop on that, but Adrian sounds like he's been there. Yeah, of course.
Don't mind.
Of course.
Sorry, just you're here.
Yeah.
I just sunset clause, carrots and boots.
Mm,
When the incentives disappear, I mean, beginning in 2030,
mm,
you're not going to get incentives to make net zero. It's going to be the minimum provision in code. So
mhm.
it'll turn from carrots to boots. So where's the value in this, and where's the funding model for this? Or does this have a sunset clause where it moves towards and I know that we'd never get behind the wheel here, but does this mean that we're going to move towards licensing, and then licensing of the community of restoration, retrofit contractors? And then is there going to be mandatory warranty requirements, and is there going to be mandatory continuing ed and all of those other programs? I know that's way outside of today's conversation, but this seems like a substantial amount of work with a question mark that comes glaring at me. I guarantee I don't have time to dive in and fix the mistakes if that one's in there. It's just, not for free. But, we're only not
4.5 years.
not even 4.5 years. Your designs and everything else could technically be in boots instead of carrots in as little as 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a question that our board, our staff, our industry advisory committee that we talk about with our long-term planning. So yeah, we could talk all day about this. So in a nutshell, I'll just say it's something that we talk about. It's something we plan for. I think that's what I love personally about working for a nonprofit and having, no membership fees for this option here, is that my vision is to either work myself out of a job or work myself into different parts of a job. And now this is no longer that flagship initiative, and maybe it's sunsetted, because I think all of us here in this room would prefer less red tape, not more. So if that meant that industry had some kind of formal, training license or certification, ultimately that's the goal. I mean, when I first came into this job and I learned that I could just go start an insulation business tomorrow and start selling insulation to little old ladies and no one would be none the wiser. Like, that's shocking. So I think some parts of industry, that's what they would like to see. And we're here to help facilitate kind of what makes sense. So
I can add some context to that, because I was part of the original group that created this whole thing.
yeah.
And it really kind of came out of how broken and fragmented the whole industry was between, everyone's HVAC, insulation, windows, we're all doing the same thing, but we weren't getting together. And we figured if we were one voice, we could tell Fortis and Hydro and the Ministry of Energy, your system sucks, do this instead. And it really worked really well. Now you had a slide up there that talked about how the rebates aren't available in the city of Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the mandates of the program is it has to be product better than code. So what you're getting at is, when we get to net zero, what happens to this program and what happens to all the rebates and what happens to all the funding?
There's no reason for
And-
rebates.
Well, so you're actually right. So in the perception, it appears that there's a sunset to this program.
Mhm.
Now, that was aligning rebates and having one voice for rebates was initial incentive or initial reason to get this group together. What's going to come out of it, and what I view coming out of it, and the frustration that I had being in the industry, was you're competing against a lot of truck and ladder, under the table, all of that industry. Even big manufacturers, people would buy windows from a big manufacturer. I'm a window retrofitter. And you're sitting here going as soon as a customer needed a receipt to get a rebate, it changed the tone of how the customer was buying the product. That was a very important part to it. So what's going to come out of it is a leveling up. And I see something similar to the roofing industry with the RCABC, is you're going to end up with an infrastructure that a homeowner now could choose to hire someone in a truck with a ladder, or they could hire somebody who's part of X, which is what the RCABC does. Is you don't have to get an RCABC certified warranted roof, but you can. And there's consultants in that whole business. It's been around since the 80s. And the reason why the RCABC was created is, in my opinion, a very similar situation that this industry's had, where it was the wild, wild west and you didn't know what you were getting.
Yeah.
The number of homeowners I've seen that get new windows, and then they saw an education post or a blog that I wrote that talked about, I did a marketing campaign, said you bought the wrong glass. And we showed people imagery. And the number of people that bought Energy Star windows thinking they bought high performance windows, only to realize they bought garbage. And it's unfortunate. And they were sold this ER path concept that went into it. This program eliminates that. So it doesn't allow Energy Star windows to go into the program. That's on purpose. That is 100% on purpose. So just because it's not about, ignore the rebates. Let's say they all go away. What purpose does this program have? And I think it's transitioned to one voice for rebates to creating one voice for training. And yeah, there's going to be cracks like insulation around windows, but that's the nature of it.
Well, let's point out that we knew in RFP, we're the largest educator in British Columbia for licensed builders. In fact, we're bigger than everybody else combined.
Yeah.
We didn't even get an invitation.
You can't get building envelope consultants to agree on how to install a window.
Oh, the man with one envelope consultant knows an answer. The man with two has no idea. But we're two watches. You don't know what time it is.
Yeah. Yeah, in some ways, we're still such a young organization that we don't have some of the same mechanisms in place. Like when we do an RFQ, it's like, hey, industries spread this far and wide, right? So that's great feedback for ways that we can improve our kind of outreach, because
I looked through and it doesn't seem to be a surprise that it's got the same benchmarks as new builder licensing.
Mm.
And you've added a mandatory requirement that this thing have an exam.
Mm-hmm.
And you've developed it under micro-credentials under a single curriculum developer. But all of that education and all of that capacity already existed here in BC. That's got 40 plus years worth of integrated conversations. And I have never, when I was sitting on the founding committee and original board for BC Beck, we never said this is for new construction only. It was part 9, part 3 buildings, new and retrofit. And all of the research, the development of that guide that you're using as your textbook and everything, Terry, how many hours did we devote at that, beating our head against the wall trying to
A
find
lot.
consensus?
Yeah.
But it grew from an incredible consortium of pretty informed building science specialists as well as mechanical and all the things you're talking about. And this went on under the radar from me.
Well, and
That seems at best a missed opportunity.
well, and that's where, again, the call is like, if there are folks in this room that you're aware of that this niche, this residential retrofit is passion for you, then please get involved, because we are doing our best, but we are a nonprofit. We have limited resources when it comes to spreading our brand message, trying to bring people into our fold, working with our sector councils. That continues to be one of the biggest challenges. I'm sure many of you in this room can relate when you're working with a group of people and they're all experts and you're trying to get them to agree on something, and it can be really challenging and we don't always have agreement. So we love more voices because it helps us narrow down those things, because again, we're going with what we understand to be the experts, and we do invite industry associations into these conversations, so we're certainly not trying to trample on those toes. But you know, Terry, like, we worked together when there was a time where I was helping to lead sector councils, and we worked together and we went through some rough times with people not agreeing, and it was very challenging for us to kind of come to some action and come to a head, right? So yeah, all I can say there is that we welcome more voices, and
That's not endearing me.
there we go.
That's opening Pandora's box if you're throwing that one out there.
Well, like I said, we go off of our training. We go off of the best practices guide was written with BC Housing and I believe FGIA. So that's the current training that we have. And then the advanced training is going to be, my understanding, like a whole new kit and caboodle. But if it sounds like there's still maybe some disagreement within that, I think that's important for us to highlight. I'm not sure what I'd be very fascinated maybe offline to chat with some more folks of like, if I can be super transparent, it is the window and door sector where we've seen the most disagreement among our professionals compared to HVAC and insulation. And as the non-technical expert, I'm like, why? Like, what's going on? Like, why is there that disconnect?
Insulation and the rough opening has nothing to do with the window and door industry. That's the building envelope.
Well, exactly. And so what we do is not how to install a window and door to the best practice. It's how to do it in a home performance mindset, how to do it with a house as a system approach, right? So
I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, let's wind you up.
Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of great conversation to be had there. So that's my final call to connect with us if you have any kind of more desire to get connected with us. But as a way of wrap up, I just want to plug that we have an annual event as well where we bring together the home performance the home performance industry. This year we're taking it to Vancouver Island for the first time. So if you want a trip or you want to come visit, that's going to be at the end of April. You can scan the QR code there for more information. And then Terry, if you're supportive, I did bring a few flyers with me. So
Sure.
I'll hang around for a bit and I can maybe leave them on a table, and that has our contact information as well. I do have it on the slide here, but I'll leave the QR code up there and then I'll leave the flyers on the table
Sure.
for contact
Yeah,
info.
you bet. Yep.
Sound good?
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me in. I'll stick around for a little bit. I don't think I can come for drinks after, which is sad, but it was nice to meet you all. I know.
Yeah, jeez.
I know. I'm going to stick around for a bit, so hopefully I can meet some faces, but I come from Abbotsford, so if I want a chance of
Traffic's
beating that
going the
rush
other.
hour,
It doesn't anymore. It goes
doesn't
both
really-
ways.
It goes both ways,
Yeah.
Terry. It's just
It used to go
wild
one
out
way.
there, so-
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks,
Really
Tanya.
appreciate it.
Great. Thanks.
That should do it. All right. So I wanted to, Terry and I were talking about some topics, and I thought that we should go back to the Greener Homes grant. You're all aware that the Greener Homes loan is alive and well, but back in February of 2024, the Greener Homes grant was discontinued for new applicants, but it is still alive. So I reached out to Diane Charest and Adam Brewis. Now, I did get a response, and I want to read that response to you. I was looking for a follow-up, but because of the election, they're not able to respond with any further information at this time. But we did get this. Applying does not guarantee fund. It does say grants remain available to homeowners who successfully applied before the intake closed and have an active application in the national portal. Applying does not guarantee funding, as applicants are processed on a first-come, first-served basis and must meet grant program criteria. The Canada Greener Homes Grant Program is currently reviewing applications that may be eligible for reactivation, meaning some homeowners with previously closed or deactivated applications are being invited to rejoin the program. Homeowners will be contacted directly in due course if funds become available and their application is eligible for reactivation. The exact number of homeowners, we asked, well, how many are still out there? You know, they couldn't answer that, but they say the exact number of homeowners remains eligible. The exact number has not yet been processed. It's difficult to determine as invitations are issued on a rolling basis. To date, 377,363 households have completed retrofits and received a grant, and 1.69 billion in grants have been issued. Now, if those of you remember when the grant was announced, it was $2.3 billion over a 7-year period that they set aside, and about a year and a half into that 7-year period, they pulled it in, and 1.69 billion. So where's the rest? So that's what the bear we're poking right now is finding out if there's anything more that we can get from Canada Greener Homes is in the way of grants. So over 81,000 applications remain active, meaning that homeowners may be in the process of completing retrofits. Notably, windows and doors remain the second most popular retrofit choice under the program. The Canada Greener Homes grant originally received over 610,000 applications, and ongoing processing allows for the assessment of remaining funds. And I think that's where they discontinued once they hit 610,000 applicants and felt that, well, if the majority of those applicants follow through, that will eat up the $2.3 billion, and that's where they pulled things. But there are still some funds left there. So with this, it would be my recommendation to manufacturers that would like to see their customers access the grant to reach out to them again and see if they can reactivate their application. I personally went through the application process for no other reason to just see how it was for our customers. I didn't have intentions of doing anything at the time, but I wanted to follow up and see the shortcomings or the advantage of the program. So I'm trying to reactivate a number just to go through and see, is it possible? I haven't had any response back yet, which is unfortunate, but your customers can go to, if you've done a quote for a customer and it's been a little while and they were thinking of the Canada Greener Home Grant, they could try to access and see if they can reapply and get some of those funds. And then, of course, there is the loan, the Canada Greener Homes loan that still is available. Plus, I also wanted to mention, you may want to look municipally. When we started accessing the grant on Vancouver Island, there were 3 municipalities. There was Sydney, North Cowichan, and Campbell River that all had funds set aside to top up the grant to $50 a window for 20 windows. So some of our homeowners were getting $250 from the federal government, $100. This is before the ESP program. They were getting $100 from the provincial government and $50 from the municipal government. So not bad. So you may want to just reach out to some of your larger municipalities and see if there's anything available to homeowners that are doing retrofits in your area. Any questions on the...
Tanya, do you have any info on that? Yeah, if there's any municipalities that are topping up on your program? Yeah.
And why isn't Jovan here today, huh?
Yeah, he's on vacation. So I am sort of aware in the same capacity you're aware, Cam. I know like Saanich also has a great top up. The Township of Langley used to have a top up. I don't know. But that website I mentioned, government, the Better Homes BC, it should, keyword, have municipal top ups listed as well. So if homeowners or yourself, for curiosity, go to the Better Homes website, you can search rebates and it, in theory, should have municipal top ups.
Perfect.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Tanya. The only other thing I wanted to touch on, for those of us that were manufacturing back in 2010, there was a program in BC called Pull Ahead BC. Did anybody else take advantage of Pull Ahead BC? So our company did. On Vancouver Island, there was only 4 companies that did, but it was a fully government-sponsored program to put your company through a lean BC or lean manufacturing process training. You had to commit to training 100% of your staff, and you had to go over a year, but they were covering the actual cost of training. You just had to cover the cost of wages. I've been looking, and there's nothing available now, but I do remember that we worked with through the CME, the manufacturers, CME, the
Canadian manufacturers.
Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters.
Yeah.
Their infrastructure, they've got a lot of infrastructure in lean manufacturing. So if you're finding that we got into it because we wanted to keep our team. We were into some slower times, had a little more time on our hands, and we're looking to try to come out of that slow period in a little more productive manner. So CME has lean programs, and I just wanted to make you aware of them. So if you go to CME, search them out. You can look at lean. They have a one-day program in BC. They have quite a lot of programs, but one of them that I would recommend is where they come to your facility. They engage as many people as you want. I talked to a manufacturer last night, a friend of mine who manufactures pallets. And it's funny, he just brought up, right now he's slowing a little bit. He'd really like to find some lean training. And we got into this conversation. It's natural. When you're slow a little bit, this is your opportunity. When we're running at 110%, there isn't the opportunity to maybe do some further training. So if you're looking for a resource, CME is a good resource. They have some programs that may be able to, they have tons of programs. One will definitely suit your operation. So any questions on that? Good. That's all I had.
Thanks, Cam. Okay, Jag, come on up. So we are going to move into a bit of once I figure out which computer I'm working on, just kind of an open forum a little bit. Feel free to jump in and pose questions, but first, Jag Deep reached out to Adrian and I, a couple of months ago now, probably, and initiated some conversations about the use of head clips, which is pretty common here in British Columbia. Not at all common in other parts of the country, I found out as we worked our way through it. So I'm just going to leave it to you to dive into the conversation and have a chat about head clips being used for holding the head of your window in, or not. Thanks.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Terry. I have my colleague, Waikeet, with me. He's better an engineer than I am. Window companies, I hear we have from Island. I see Innotech is here. Sorry, I might have missed.
West Coast, Tyee.
Okay. Shop drawings, everybody's windows has head clips. Any other main attachment type? Nail flange?
Straps, probably. Innotech would
Strap
use straps,
anchors?
Yeah.
Through frame?
Anybody installing through the frame in BC? I wouldn't. It's certainly not something I've seen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Slotted angles for deflection, like angle attachment with slotted holes.
Okay. Yeah.
No, so definitely a few different methods. And the reason head clips came into our attention is because our project managers challenged the engineering team saying you're putting too many head clips. Your competition is not. So why are you specifying so many head clips? And honestly, other than calculations, I had nothing else. And I had
Other one.
this one.
Yeah, that one there. Yeah.
I had a great engineer, but I want to acknowledge our management team first for investing thousands of dollars into doing this testing. We ran testing with head clips, with strap anchors, with angle attachment, through frame attachment, steel angles, aluminum angle attachments, so a lot of them. But the primary topic today is head clips, which are the weakest link in the attachment, if I can call so. Reza, who is a structural engineer, he joined our team, and he's the one, because I was trying to have him stamp the drawings because I was doing that before. And he's like, Jagdeep, I don't believe in this, so I need to do testing. So I'm like, okay, let's do some testing. Let's find out what it is. So that's what we are going to share today. Afshin Dureki, he is a PhD person doing our product testing. So I want to acknowledge them because they're not here today. So let's dive into the results. So we tested we tested a 6 foot by 7 foot casement fixed over fixed window. The dark line is the steel in the couple mullion, and then the horizontal mullion did not have steel. So our main weight transfer is going from top to bottom. The table on the side, because our test wall is not controlled by the pressure, we have to control the RPM, which gives us the PSF of pressure, then the deflection, and then the residual deflection over there. And the red is the point at which the connection failed. So that is what we saw. And it is nail attachment on the side, nails every nail hole, and then head clips 8 inches apart, 6 inches at the mullion. This is how the attachment was. We made a complete test buck, just like a construction wall would be. This is our structural testing test wall in-house. So this is how the window looked once it is attached. The nail flange, the head clips with 3/8 deflection allowance, which they're supposed to take, which determines how much the bending moment will be once the wind load is applied. So when we applied the pressure at 30 PSF, this is what we saw. So head clips failing in bending. And the ones at the center disengaged. And as you can expect, because head clips are flexible in the terms of they bend before they disengage, the other ones stayed engaged and the load got distributed further apart. But the definition of failure is also very interesting. Is the head clip considered failed as soon as it bends or when the nail flange disengages? So that is still up for debate, but we are considering failure as when it is disengaged. So which is like nail flange has bent, head clip has bent to the point that they have disengaged and now come back. Then we said, okay, maybe the connection because it's a coupled window, that maybe the connection here, the nail flange is too flexible. So we put a strap to connect it to make sure that it is like a continuous nail flange. This is how it looked. So we put a sheet metal and screws every 3 inches to make sure that this connection is continuous. And even on the frame itself, we put a metal plate to connect it through to make sure that, okay, this is like a continuous window now. So let's see what difference it makes. So attachment, same. Failure at 33 PSF, disengagement, the same. Minor improvement. And you can see from 30 to 33 PSF. Now, in terms of the attachment, as engineers, we are interested in what to consider. So the loads that are generally applied, all of us generally understand. Sorry, I'm going through this. I'm supposed to get some screens here. That, okay, wind load, everybody applies. Guard load, we do apply guard load when we consider glass strength. because we say point load or infill guard load, everybody applies. But do they apply for the attachment? I haven't seen a consensus about that on the industry. And then attachment strength, strength of each component is important, but also how much load gets to that one fastener is important. So the last but not the least is the building structure. And we'll see, Wakey will cover that part, why that's important, because buildings are not being built the way they were built before. And especially when they're not meeting the architectural drawings, that is very interesting on new construction as well. So what loads are generally applied? We see that the wind load is generally applied across the entire perimeter or the entire surface area. And guard load, depending on engineers' interpretation, they may or may not apply it. Dead load of the window, nobody is applying for the fastener connection, especially not the head because it's not relevant. But I've seen some windows where it's not level square plumb and the fasteners there can have a dead load impact, but generally they are not considered. Seismic, nobody considers for the attachment, but should they be? I don't know. Like, I'm not here giving a design guideline, I'm just prompting questions. So in terms of the guard load, generally it can be a line load or a point load. But the impact of those, if you consider guard load, where should that be? Should it be all on each end complete, as if the entire load is being taken by one side or the other, or should it be split half and half? I don't know. Something to think about. Infill guard load. Do you just apply it here and apply on the entire sill, or you consider that 12 inches and apply for every single section to see what is your worst case scenario? When I talk about this to our PMs, they are like, their eyes are going like this. They're like, stop talking. Like, this is nightmare. So attachment strength, I guess I'll pass to Wakey on this.
Yeah, so to analyze the attachment strength, basically our thought process was first we look at each component in isolation, and that's the fastener, substrate, nail flange, hit clip, etc. So since we're focusing on hit clips today, let's just look at how it works. So basically basically we isolated the strength. We used the bending formula. We isolated the strength F there. And that allows us to see if we modify certain characteristics of the hit clip, how that affects the strength. So with our typical hit clip and attachment, we found that hit clip bending was typically the weakest part of the attachment, although other failure modes should still be considered. So for an example hit clip with those characteristics, we estimated an approximate strength of 41 pounds, and we did measure it experimentally and found it was in the same order of magnitude. And next, we examined how the loads are distributed to each component. Most people are familiar with the trapezoidal load distribution. And you can see here that this is the amount of load that would be distributed to the head. And then next, we looked at load concentration at mullions. And this is the amount of load you can expect to be transferred to this point, carried by the mullion. And then you can either handle the load concentrated there by having separate frequencies dependent on location, or you can just generally increase the number of hit clips overall. So most people typically go with a higher general frequency overall. And although we can come up with a model to describe what's happening, we really wanted to physically validate our model. And that's what we were doing when we showed you our experiments. Next, we examined the loading factors we needed to consider. And in the building code, the ultimate limit state factor is 1.4 for wind load. And then CSA S136, which was the standard for steel, which we're using steel head clips, it has a limit state design loading factor of 0.9. And compounding the two, we found we have an overall safety factor of 1.56. And then if you need to account for unknowns, you might want to have a discretionary safety factor. And then basically looking at the results, our failure occurred roughly at 30 PSF. And as you know, as we discussed, we divide that by 1.56 and we got around 19 PSF. And since this is NAFS, we round down to the nearest 5 PSF. So that setup only really qualified for PG-15. And that may surprise you or it may not surprise you. And this was for full disengagement as opposed to yield, which many engineers would have considered as the failure. And then here, when we talk about substrate, a lot of the times we've been seeing that there's only one hit stud. And it's not unusual in those cases for us to see that the nails are not being attached to a stud. And in fact, we've seen that some architects' drawings are showing the nails actually not being into a stud. And in this case, even though we had said that hit clip bending is usually the worst case, this would obviously not be the case if it's not installed to a solid substrate. So, given what we've talked about today, do you think that the hit clip should be limited to certain building types or wind loads? Or how we may want to modify them to suit different applications? So we came to this formula previously. As you can see, if you double the width, you can double the strength of your hit clips. Whereas for the same material, if you double the thickness, that increases your strength by 4 times. So do note that as you increase the bending strength of the hit clip, so the other failure modes that weren't critical previously may now become critical. So the loads that we apply should also be considered as very important. And what alternatives can we consider? We've already talked about the ones we've seen, the slotted angle, the strap anchors, etc. So as Terry has said, we've seen across Canada that a lot of people don't use hit clips. And in fact, in several jurisdictions, they just simply use nails in nail flanges and somehow they're fine with it. So what are your guys' opinions about this?
Well, let me pose, am I on? Yeah. How many people in the room that are manufacturers did their NAFS testing in a lab using head clips? Okay. How many of those manufacturers have head clips on their install drawings?
Generic install drawings.
So, you know, we all know it. We all know that using a head clip on a flange window is not going to get you a PG 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. And yet we're labeling our products like that because that's what we got in the lab. And I've seen products installed in the lab, and I've contributed to some of those installation details in the lab to achieve performance that is not realistic in the field using a head clip or some other alternative methods. So the question, you know, when Jagdeep and I can never get it, Waikeet, came to us and said, you know, there's a problem here. I went, yeah, I know. Of course we know. So the question then becomes, is it enough of a problem, or is it a significant problem that we need to address it as an industry and maybe look at alternatives to head clips, because everybody knows that they're not providing the design strength that we're claiming. On the flip side of that, how many windows are blowing out of houses every year in BC that have head clips on them?
The question will be, has anyone taken apart the window assembly and discovered this, right? Would that be a concern, or are we talking kind of lab testing environment and analyzing this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case, is that I'm not aware of any windows like falling out of houses or getting impacted and falling out. I mean, I'm going to bet that there are cases where, the lack of the integrity of a head clip structurally has probably contributed to some issues. But again, nobody's falling through windows, and windows aren't falling out of buildings.
Murray, can I just put one comment before? Yep. So we did a scenario. Actually, we were at FGIA. Anton was there last week. And it was discussed how the head clip started. They started as a continuous strip. That's how the industry started with a head clip. And if that was the scenario, even if it disengaged in the middle, as soon as the pressure would have been released, because it was still engaged at the ends, it would have brought back. But along the line somewhere, we changed them into, because the site did not want to cut them, the strips, we made them into little pieces so the installers can take them in their pocket. The challenge that we had from our project manager team is that, Jagdeep, it's not just the head clips, there's flashing on top. So we did test one with the flashing, and to your point, if nobody knew, did the tree actually fall in the forest? If nobody knew it, right? So we did the testing, and you'll be surprised that it was at 30 PSI or PSF that we had the same failure. But to find the failure, we had to remove the flashing, because we could see the window going through the motion and kind of just snap out, but it snapped back in, not snap back in, but it was hidden because there was a flashing on top. And we put rain screen bars every 12 inches to hold that flashing in place. So I guess there are two aspects of it. It did not change the strength of the connection, but it hid the failure. So if that answers your question.
Well, I'm sure there's potential for it. Our company does a lot of renovations, and we take out the existing windows, on a daily basis, right? I don't ever recall anybody commenting that there was an issue there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And because these are 1 in 50 wind loads that we are talking, I do agree. Like, you're probably never going to see it, but as an engineer who's going to stamp on it, am I going to bet my career on that? And when I asked one of the outsourced engineer, I said, to Terry's point, that, hey, you are putting head clips, so you're sure that this will work, right? He goes, that's how your NAFS testing is done. Isn't the window company taking that liability that your windows are going to withstand with the head clips? I'm like, no, we did not test it with the head clips. So there's definitely a room for alignment in the industry.
Yeah. Murray, were you gonna? Sorry. Yeah.
So a couple of things. Just going back to leaky condo where we got steel stud and just EIFS or whatever on the outside of those. It has not been uncommon when we take those apart to find out that the only thing that's holding the studs in place was the cladding. Because the sill pan of the steel stud tracks is where the condensate or the leaky water was collecting. The fasteners were completely gone. And we've been involved in lots, but we started taking the siding off of the side of a mid-rise and immediately had to evacuate the entire complex because, you lean on the wall, you're going to fall out. So putting just the flashing, and I'm glad you did quantify that you did put the strapping in there. I would point out it's more common to see that on 16-inch centers than on 12-inch centers, but notwithstanding. And what the nature of that is, you got everything from whatever dunnage is in the cheapest bin at Home Depot to people who only use treated 3/4 inch Douglas fir plywood for that strapping requirement.
So, but I mean, you're bringing up really good points. The other thing is in single family residential, what is the PSF usually? What is the rating for most houses, right? 15, 20, it's sort of in that threshold, but I agree. Where's the smoking gun? I've taken apart more buildings than most people have ever seen built. And
Can you throw it on a flash drive or no? Yeah.
So once your substrate has gone through cycling, so as what we was saying, maybe it's not the hectare anything, maybe it's just the near flows, but it's not going into a substrate. So it's not just, we're not just saying hectares are bad or don't use it. Consider the design factors, the thickness of the hectare, the frequency and everything. We have a project at SFU, and because it is up on the SFU mountain, the building is right there. Once you look at the wind factor and the topographical factor, the wind pressure is so high, we had headwinds back to back. And that really kind of made everybody, what the hell is going on here? You have to carry that window. And here's the kicker. Some of the windows are large, so they need that frequency, but some of the smaller windows don't. But the PMs find it too difficult to communicate window by window frequency. So the installer has to bear the brunt of putting that headset because that is one frequency specified on the drawing.
it makes me want to ask, and then I'll give it back here. Did you do the testing with just driving a framing spike and bending it over like 94% of
back in
single
the
family
old days?
homes?
Yeah.
You know, you had your deflection header, you had it all in there. I can't find it anywhere in the code, but
Oh, I don't know if I have a big one.
Sure. All right. One thing to just remember about smoking gun is windows are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we may be basing our historical evidence on
how big it
aluminum big windows that were more rigid and created more of a uniform kind of deflection. I think you amplified the issue is it's creating a focal point of the load too with the vertical mullion, right? And the need to go to the coupled windows. So there's things changing that may cause other things that we're not planning for, right? So someone says, why do we have to do this? We've never done it before. Well, we're seeing 8 feet by 8 foot vinyl windows going into 6-story buildings. Show me where that existed 25 years ago. If that was, it was aluminum, which could have a very different material property. But one thing I want to point out, and Terry, I want you to hear this because I think this is worthwhile.
Yep.
The 2020 National Building Code says that if a product falls under the scope of NAFS, its only compliance path is NAFS testing. But because we don't test for attachment in NAFS in a lab, does this pointing this out mean that there's never a window will ever fall under the scope of NAFS for its sake of being code compliant? Meaning Part 5 is its only path under Part 5. Because this could, under the 2020 National Code, if you've tested your product under NAFS, there's in theory no need to engineer a solution for that window to go into a building. But yet we don't test the same way in a lab, the way we attach in the field.
Correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't NAFS, I know the CSA used to require that when you tested it, it had to be installed generally in the manner that it's intended to be installed in the.
That's explicit by the language, yes.
Yeah. And so when you explode that out, you can't, that's kind of telling that nobody puts clips on when you're testing in your NAFs. And it always, that thing always frustrates me too, because when we have these mullion extenders and then people are just drilling right through the frame and saying that this is fine, it has no impact on air tightness or anything. I mean, if you're gonna put those interior components on there, shouldn't that be tested that way? And I've always held to that and nobody's ever shot me down.
So when we test for NAFs, we have an installation method. Obviously, you have to put your window into an installation buck and test it. And it's one of those things that I think needs to be better clarified when it comes to NAFs in particular. And I
don't know what to tell you.
There's an extra responsibility there, I think.
Probably too big to do that though. Oh, we could try it. Sorry. Good thing I was in the washroom. Yeah.
So like every test report that we have has the installation method. It has the type of fasteners, the frequency, everything is laid out in there. And that's not on the part of the report that would normally be given. It's obviously not on the labels or anything like that. But changing our installation method from the NAS result changes the results of the window. So that's obviously something that the engineers are paying very close attention to. But if there were a better tie-in, if the testing agencies, for example, were actually maybe there needs to be some sort of responsibility or reporting on whether or not the tested specimen is actually installed in the method that's spelled out in the manufacturer's installation guidelines, something like that.
So this is where kicking the can is what Andrews calls it. The architect says the structural engineer, or the architect would say the SB, the engineer who's giving SB or SC, is going to be responsible, and that person will say the window supplier is responsible because it's their product as per their NAFS testing. So I think as window manufacturers, we need to be privy to the mindset of people. Nothing may happen. It will be totally fine for next 200 years. But I mean, as engineers, we just look at the worst case scenario and see what can happen and what is allowable, what safety factors. So yeah.
I'm just going to sneak in with a comment and maybe a question. Was there any consideration for the stiffness of that vertical mold section relative to the anchoring? Because I think that we run multiple mold sections or mullion options in NAFs when we test. No reinforcement, all reinforcement, whatever the case. We often find that the stiffer the mullion, the more load it transfers out, and we don't really net a better result. We net less deflection in the mullion section, but the scenario is about the same. So was there any consideration within the testing that you did there for that, or is it more of just a generic window with the multiple installation methods?
We did consider. So before we went into this testing, we have tested windows with vertical steel only and vertical and horizontal. And Carl, to your point, we did find that the stiffer the mullion, the less the deflection on the mullion itself, but a stiffer system always breaks at a lower value because all the load goes to the fastener. We talked briefly about the aluminum angle attachment. Aluminum angle is very flexible. Although it is connected with only a screw going through a PVC wall, which is 1/16 or 90 thou, and that screw can easily shear, but because the aluminum angle deflects as the window deforms, it distributes the load over multiple fasteners. So it does not fail as quickly as the head clips because they just take the load from the mullion, which is trying to stay straight, and it just snaps off. But to your point, yes, we have had, not on this test, but we had our coupled window testing with steel on both sides or one side only. And we knew that stiffer the connection, lower the failure, or the lower the strength would be.
I often run into a situation for non-Part 9 buildings when engineers are involved where we have the same window system, but we have the ability for a fiberglass reinforcement and steel reinforcement. They don't like the fiberglass because it does bend. But with what you just mentioned there, we can make it more rigid and more stiff. We're actually affecting the installation to a greater degree. Mm-hmm. And under LC, under NAFs, it doesn't matter. The deflection is noted. It's not limited. But when engineers get involved, things become more stiff and they negatively affect the fastening. So just a comment there.
So just as a shameless plug to this conversation when it comes to NAFs language clarification, we do have a NAFs review task group at FenCan Canada, and that was the majority of our topic last 2-hour meeting was going down the rabbit hole of how we are going to align kind of the multiple stakeholder responsibilities for this topic. So anybody interested, feel free to send me off an email that we are having that conversation.
When we first started this topic and I talked to Terry and Adrian, I was in a panic mode. I'm like, talk to the industry, stop using head clips. And it was very interesting as soon as Adrian said, oh, I have seen window suppliers use thicker head clips. I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe it's not all doom and gloom. There are options, and that's what Ricky was saying, looking at those different parameters, which one can work for you. And then listening to industry, Anton and Gary Brown. I talked to him last week. He talked about the history, how the head flashing or the head retention came into play, and the building settling and what risk it has on the windows and everything. So it is more complex than just saying, oh, don't use head clips. So definitely there is a place and purpose for them, but understanding the substrate, whether you're using a screw, head clip has a risk with the single head studs. On the new construction, I would say 20% of the projects I'm seeing are single head studs. Although the drawing shows a built-up beam or whatever, but a single 2x6, and because the head clip, the nail is so far up, it's not even going into a substrate. So there are more than just one aspect of it. We're going to show something?
Yeah, we're trying. Can I?
Well, and Murray's got the last comment here, so.
So, I mean, that's a great point, right? But let's think this through in the Part 9 context. Part 9 has an installation requirement that's referenced that says that you must install in accordance with the manufacturer's installation requirements. So I don't want to name names, but there's a few window manufacturers out there that tell me that their insurers are pretty hesitant to suggest that the manufacturer should get into the business of providing installation instructions, because it's not like you make a ton of money off it if you're supply only, but you gain all of the liability of it. But if it needs to be installed generally in conformance with the way it was intended to be installed in the field, are you not kind of admitting that you have an installation provision? So in the fullness of time, if we do see failure, that I can hear that argument. I do a lot of work as expert in the Supreme Court. That'd be a pretty tough thing to fight if you tried to plead we don't have installation instructions, go figure it out on your own. Just the
Installation structure, points of attachment, or everything that goes after?
Well, I mean, it's just generic. It says you have to test it under NAS in general conformance with the intended method for installation. So you can't. Now, I've also been told when I watch the testing.
Referring to the manual, to the instructions.
Well, the manufacturer's instructions, if you have them, but what I'm hearing here to the point is how else can you test it unless you give some direction on how it's being installed? And by the sheer
products that being installed, not in accordance with the manufacturer's for the purposes of testing.
But I've also sat there for lots of hours watching different window manufacturers go through testing of their product in there. And it starts leaking water and they're trying to get, PG up, and their driving wind issue is kind of getting on them. And they go in there and they say, well, putting more sealant over where it says sealant joint's okay. And I've seen them gobbed in there with 5, 6, 7 tubes of sealant, and then finally it stops water going in. And there's no provision that says you got to report the amount of failures you have before you got to pass. And I've seen that sort of supported by some testing authorities with engineers who say, by the letter of the law, you got to pass with that, and that's how you instructed us to install it.
To a lab, all the windows are kind of installed like they were installed in the submarine, right?
Oh, yeah, well, that's my point. Even if you're using a rod Cox sealing joint, or and then where are we going to be when people start checking to see what happens when people are gluing their nailing flange windows in with sealant all over them? How does that affect all of this? Your structural loads are. What are you doing to your air barrier? What are you doing to all that? Let's take it tomorrow.
I guess as Anton said, the buildings are getting taller, the windows are getting bigger. So just being privy of what we are getting on our plate. Like today is not like stop this and change everything today. It's just bringing to light that there is something that we need as a group to be aware of. Strap anchors, you're going to show something?
Yeah, we're just let down about there.
Okay.
Getting close. 1.5 gauge.
Yeah.
Down side load. One thing I would say is it's everybody who's been through the leaky condo side and litigation on leaky condos should be paying close attention, because there's a lot of railing engineers that are no longer doing engineering. In fact, I heard a rumor about one being potentially charged criminally. It wasn't like railings failed. But when we started doing leaky condo repairs and lawyers got involved, it was who can we find to get what we can get out of them? And all it took was other engineers evaluating existing railing attachments and discovered that, okay, the railing is fine. The bolts might be fine, but it's bolted into a single 2x10 rim joist that's not properly attached to anything. And they were all signed off by an engineer. So it's similar to like the nail going through plywood and not into an actual lintel or something. Every single leaky condo I was a part of had an inadequate railing attachment. And every single railing manufacturer and engineer attached to that got in trouble.
No, it's too, because it was driven right down through the vinyl deck membrane, and right where the water pond is, and the stone.
Yeah. And if
Rotting the fastener outside.
And if you've ever seen how railing attachments are done now, you would be shocked at the response to it. So
Sketch that all up and got the engineering done on it, said, why are we not putting it on the face? And yes, exactly. When I got going with that, I was working with RDH and yeah, I mean, the whole thing, the tension member of the continuation of the sheathing and taking the rotation and the hangers and everything else. But those details came to fruition in 92, 93, because I was not satisfied with just screwing railings down, because I had all of those take aparts that showed teardrops of decay. My bigger concern there was we can't have the fasteners on the horizontal surface.
So there's your.
So this is the first one we were showing with just the hip clips. And you can see at the top, basically that's, the second one's basically the same. With the one we were showing. So it occurred at a very similar PG rating, and this one with the rains, basically you can see the flashing and the rain screen. It doesn't look like much right now. And even when it fails, it doesn't even look like anything happened. But if we basically drag, if we remove everything, we will see.
We have a failure.
Thing.
Can you just use a pointer to show the head clips that are disengaged?
Yeah, you can see here. And you can see here, it's still over
Right,
the
yeah.
flange, and here it's underneath the nail flange. So you can see it's already failed. And that happened.
Anyway.
So you can see from the start, from the first one to the third one, there was only a 4 PSF difference. So the claim that having rain screen and flashing will help, you can see that really that's not that
Made little difference. Yeah. Yeah.
How much can we or should we consider this to be more of a guard situation as opposed to a wind load, negative wind load or suction? Because those clips will not fail when the wind is hitting.
What's the frequency of negative pressure is where you're going.
Exactly.
Right? So positive pressure, that would never be a problem, of course. I don't know. Murray, maybe you've got some data on negative pressure in
think
buildings.
it's just generalized as a PG rating or one.
Earthquakes are easier. We can
Yeah.
have a set of frequencies and
Yeah.
and we know amplitude, duration. We can do a lot of stuff with that. When it comes to wind, in fairness, the wind provisions on our lateral load in the new National Model Code have gotten way more serious because they're realizing that we've significantly understated the effects of wind. And they realize that most of the testing that was done for lateral loads under seismic, they just modified wind testing apparatus. And then I went and built one that I can apply the loads at the bottom and hold the top static or reverse it. and put the loads at the midpoint. So I can do wind, I can do seismic. And then when we did it, everything changed. That's why we got all the new provisions in Canada and around the world. Because the deflections and everything are serpent. You'll see it tomorrow, but it's a super active wall in there just under story drift. Forget about high wind loads and excess of 1 in 50s and all of that stuff for earthquakes. Just the day-to-day stuff that happens when garbage trucks go by and your normal wind racking that you have is way more significant than you think. I mean, the engineers will tell you that story drift limit states are, you know, arguably, and I'll bring some of the references for that, but 1 in 500, but you take 118 inches of a Part 9 wall and you put that deflection on there, that thing is expected to be cycling
For sure,
a quarter of an inch, and it all happens in the middle band of the wall. So, you know, you ask me about wind, it's a bear, because where's the limit state? Like if I were an engineer with a seal on stuff, I would definitely want to have a hard limit state and reread the standard of practice for my association before I started digging in on that, because at least you're protected by the limit state arguments. Otherwise, we couldn't do anything. But your question's germane. And
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't have experience in big buildings and tall buildings. At 30 stories on the leeward side, you know, what are those negative pressures? Or at the corners, or
they're sort of sustained too.
okay.
When you really get those big and you look at membrane failures on roofs on those kinds of things, you'll see they just go into a standing limit. So the dynamics and the vortex are fairly constant. So you don't get that cyclical. And then, you know, but you want to take a nail out, right? What's more problematic, that constant ratcheting or one? But your testing here was one load cycle, right? To service, and that's pretty frightening stuff. But you know me, right? I don't get nailing flanges for a million other reasons. I'm convinced we should be strap anchoring, but I don't know if you've done any.
We did test the strap anchor method as well. It was much stronger.
Yeah, it did not feel like we maxed out our pressure on the wall. It did not
And from my perspective, as long as you got a logical mechanical connection into the extrusion, that strap anchor, your fasteners are in shear, so embedment isn't nearly as critical. You know, even the shear capacity and sheathing alone, if that nail finds something, it's finding pretty good shear capacity in there. So yeah, you know, I honestly, you want my honest opinion, I keep pushing further and further into the black hole of what is the future for nailing flange.
So apparently that is something that has come up in the recent standard, as in somebody, Adrian, you were mentioning or something?
So
in
clips were added to CSA 440.4.
22, yeah, they were, fairly small references, again, because it's a BC centric detail. You know, there's very, very few manufacturers, installers across the country that are nailing flange windows in. You know, they're mostly box windows or brick molds or et cetera, right? So
that's the other thing that Terry brought up, that head clips were prominently a BC thing. They're not across the Canada. But also I'm convinced that if you just nail through the nail flange or screw through the nail flange, head deflection is going to happen and your window is going to get impacted.
Compressed,
Gravity is going to take over. So you need to have some sort of deflection mechanism, but you also need to consider what head clips can actually provide.
Well, it's cyclical. The other thing in my rack is I can add a cyclical top gravity load for snow and blah, blah, blah. And when you start adding that into the equation, you realize you need a substantial rough opening on the three sides and then have that demo. But I would also like to take a look at this habit of jamming the horseshoe spacers into the back of the nailing flange across the bottom.
don't do that.
No, I know. I mean, you know, I don't know. Window manufacturer says, yeah, fine, go ahead. But
I've seen lots of them.
But how many people are out there still to this day installing and draining the subsill, which is a very prescriptive requirement?
And they phone you up and they say, how come my sill jam extension is 1/4 of an inch short? What's going on?
Yeah.
And what does that do to
You know.
conversation here?
Yeah, about what-
At the top, but is that
Yeah.
the water? Like, honestly, don't do it.
Yeah.
And the last point is when you put the capillary brake on there, it's going to be at least 3/8 of an inch. There's really little precedent for anything less. And then I was looking at the formula, but what's the relationship between gauge of steel? Like, could we
Yeah,
just go to
you tested some thicker ones, didn't you?
They did test a 16 gauge.
And it did make an improvement.
It did make an improvement,
but it was only like 10%, right?
something around there, because it is the tributary load concentration at the,
Yeah.
so that is a much bigger factor.
So what about a little bit wider two fasteners and a little gauge increase? Still fits in a pouch, right?
That is, so what we found, because our nail plant has a vertical and a horizontal slot,
Yeah.
so a screw attachment, which allows for vertical deflection, is many times stronger.
Well, it depends on the screw for pull-out though, too, on this one.
But the screw is
And the head.
4 times stronger than the.
Well, depending on the screw,
Yes.
right? If they're digging in their pouch and throwing drywall screws.
That's good. Yeah, close that.
Yeah, and the strength of the head clip isn't everything, because the nail flange itself also bends.
Yeah.
So basically,
flange
it's the
for that shape.
bending of that and the bending of the head clip which causes it to disengage.
Interesting to know what Dane County does for, installation.
They're probably not using flange windows. No. Yeah.
They
yeah.
do a lot of frame attachment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to add kind of a final note to this, for current state, I love the elastic conversation as far as the engineering, because that's flawed, I would say, in our current evaluation of products, that we miss essentially the whole life cycle of the product over the course of so many years, that it is only this single point failure, non-elastic changes in engineering that actually matter to the engineering world. So oftentimes the failure state is either the fastener being disconnected, and one fastener is a failure state, as well as breakage of glass at 2 stories and above. That if you have breakage in glass, that's going to trigger a non-elastic failure. The bend state for that is pretty significant, I found.
Well,
That-
there's a lot of frightening things here. The 2012 earthquake in Hawaii there, they had no reportable damage of anything structural from that. But they're all lots of rooms, very low glazing area in there.
Yep.
We used those deflections and ran 20 by cycles like so long. And we learned a whole bunch about what happens to the wall. That's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But we also realized that at that point, we sheared off 5% of the sheathing nails because they're coil load and they're spot welded. And when they go in, that spot weld hardening that happens and then brittles the fastener, it blows them off, and you finish a cycle of an 8-second exposure to a completely survivable event. Like one that everybody go, whew, we escaped all the damage. And all those fasteners that were code conforming. And then when we went back to the supplier, because when we tried them with the first time we did it and they broke,
Yep.
we found out that they're selling non-conforming diameter fasteners in coil load for fastener, for sheathing attachment. When we asked them why, they said, well, because they're cheaper and people want cheaper. They said they don't make code. I said, I don't care. I'm not putting them on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of conversations that is, unfortunately, right? The painter will fix everything in new construction, and the window guys will get blamed for everything in performance.
Yeah.
Never happens.
Wow. And
All right.
sorry, just last
yeah,
piece.
we need to wrap up.
Guard for that spot. The standard is A500 is what the engineers are using as their reference for that. That currently is the only one they can continue to point at. So in part 9, that's not a codified standard. So there is a bit of a tricky wicket on that whole conversation.
There's not a lot of requirements regards to part 9. It's multi-unit.
Oh man,
Oh,
we live in
hang
the
on,
window
hang on,
world.
Hang on.
Yeah, don't.
We
Let's,
don't-
no,
we don't have enough time, but I do want to touch on it. Thank you, Jagdeep, and wait. Thank you, appreciate it. So I don't know, we're not gonna throw head clips out yet, but there's definitely a conversation that needs to continue. We are out of time, but there's a couple of things I did want to talk about. We reached out to BC Building Officials Interpretation Committee about guard glazing in dwelling units, and whether or not it was stairwells, ramps, and landings only, or if it was everywhere in that dwelling unit where the window needed to meet the guard requirements. It took a long time. We finally got that back from them a few weeks ago. In a dwelling unit, if the window is required to meet guard, 900 millimeters from the floor, 600 millimeters to the grade from the floor, it needs to meet guard anywhere in that unit. So be aware that that's been their interpretation, and you're going to want to watch it, because my guess is going to be building officials are going to be having a little more scrutiny on that. We already were seeing it. Certainly, I came across it a number of times where a building official was asking for guard glazing in other places in the house. Anyway, that has now come down as their formal interpretation. We've also reached out, I don't know if it matters to anybody here, but the Ontario Building Officials Association, they're looking at it as well as Alberta Ministry of Housing. They've already told us that they're going to have the same interpretation, and they're just working on providing us a formal written interpretation, or potentially a stand data. WOCDs, window opening control devices, really quick on that. No change in BC. We're not seeing, they're not biting at all. No interest. Alberta has a stand data. You can use them for fall protection and egress. Quebec has not changed their code. They're still running off 2015 NBC. They allow them. Again, we've had some great conversations with Ontario building officials. They're now looking at WOCD devices in Ontario and whether or not they're going to provide us with a compliance path for those devices. What was the other one I was going to talk about? Solar heat gain. I mean, you guys already talked about it, but there is, I was going to show it. If you've not seen it, where the heck is that? I got too many mices here. Come on, where is this here? Oh, come on, man. Right there. I don't know, can you see that? So this is the table that is proposed for 2025 NBC and accepted, I think, Adrian. I think that's probably...
Very kindly pointed out we're at our period.
Yeah, we aren't. Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, but you better be ready. That's okay. I'm going to share it anyway. So this is the original table that was in the proposal for 2025, and you can see that it had 17% window to wall, 22%, and more than 22%. And there was your solar heat gain numbers. The guys at AVFQ did a lot of research, and they came back and they provided this table for proposal. So this now takes into account greater window to wall ratio and values. It's based on zones, which makes perfect sense, and then different solar heat gain limits. And you can see 0.26 covers everybody once you get to greater than 30%. So is it going to come into play nationally? Probably. I mean, that's kind of my assumption. But BC has not yet said whether or not they're going to buy into this or not. So we don't know if it's going to come to BC.
Next one general comment though. The Codes Reconciliation Agreement in 2006.
Everybody has to harmonize. Good luck. Good luck.
Signed up by all the provinces and territories, and the 2025 national is committed to being a 25 national. So you can expect the latest date that you'll see that officially published should be December 31st.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Which means we're dark until then, but all of the provinces and territories, point one, are committed to 18 months for adoption. And so a lot of this stuff that
I'll bet you a beer on it, Murray.
I don't know that they could win that. And the second point that I want to make is I cannot get anybody to look me in the eyes when I ask them under the new harmonized code, there's no option for opting out of the national model code. So
I'll buy you a beer when it happens. Yeah. Me and Adrian will buy you a beer, buy you 2 beer when that all happens. Like I just said, Quebec's still under the 2015 NBC. I know. Yeah, no, I hear you. And I say the same thing, that they are required. Yeah.
Way of dealing with through the BC Efficiency Act.
No. Yeah, okay, you could have the BC Efficiency Act adopt this table. No, it's a great idea.
Essentially, they're in a custodial
state of flux.
Well, no, they're still going through some of the election blackouts. But the last
But in BC?
Well, still in BC.
Oh, okay.
So the minister that we talked to over at Energy Minds for energy efficiency, there is a need for a rewrite of that. So there is an opportunity for us to have that conversation.
Yeah,
There's a gap right now in some of the labeling.
But they drew a ton of heat when they tried to codify stuff under the National Energy Code, and then it became another accountability beyond the building code. So I don't know what their appetite was to do that. Just depends who's running the show.
You know, I thought it was pretty amenable to a conversation about changing language. So I think if we come back around and we propose some language for them that seems reasonable, they might actually have an appetite for it.
Well, if you just prove how much cooling loads are going to be required to maintain the comfort, right? That would make a lot of sense because you can tie it with the energy efficiency.
And if you got a like 1,000 BTU heating capacity, you don't have 1,000 BTU cooling capacity. That heat pump through the reversing valve, there's a 8 to 14% drop in that. So you have to be even higher in the capacity with that heat pump cooling to hit your. So yeah, you're chasing a really significant cooling challenge to make a balanced choice in your heat pump technology. And if you don't, they're going to start just blowing up because they short cycle or they're overloaded. But again, the technology of heat pumps now full like type 3 heat pump technologies with variable pressures. These things are reliable down to almost 26 below winter design temperature. 95% of Canada can now go with no supplemental heat in there. So you can't even like overshoot your cooling and make it up with a little supplemental heat with an electric thing for a 2% duty cycle. So this whole conversation is coming down to net zero really pushes you to make the right decisions on building enclosure design and balancing your choices for the best capital cost of construction. And if you get all of that right, you're actually building durability and longevity into everything without changing technology. It's sort of win-win-win.
So it may be correct to also monthly, variable speed compressors in the heat pumps, right? That is the way to.
I don't think the variable pressure in the heat pump is not going to make the adjustment between its heating and cooling. It's just going to adjust on the heating side of the cycle down to, because it loses efficiency down there, but the overall focus for performance is too really.
I should always add an extra hour whenever Murray comes to an event. No, I'm just razzing you, man, but we are out of time. So I got to cut you off. But so a couple of quick things. First off, thanks for coming. We really appreciate it, of course. Tomorrow, the Canadian Glazing Conference, our second annual, is in this building. Starts at 9:15 with some great education and hang out with us for another day. FenCan in Winnipeg is also this week on Thursday and Friday. If you feel like coming to Winnipeg, come on down. Top Glass, April 30th in Toronto. I'm going to be presenting there for Patrick and his gang. And then the AGM, Fenestration Canada's AGM Spring Conference is in Halifax, May 27th and 30th. I would again like to thank Bridget and Maria from Sherwin-Williams for sponsoring us, as well as Martin from JSA Machinery. Appreciate your guys supporting us. As always, you do such a great job. We have a space reserved downstairs at the Dominion bar/restaurant. Come on down. We'll buy you a glass of wine or a beer or whatever and hang around and give Murray a few more minutes to talk while we're down there. So it'll be all good. Kyle, last words?
I would just like to say thank you. I see a lot of different faces than we see typically in our meetings. That's a good sign. I think that anybody is more than welcome to join our meetings. If you would like to invite, or we can just push the invite, please join. I think we should look at doing that.
Yeah, for sure. It was great. Good to see. Yeah, good to see some new faces here for sure. That's great. Also, really quick, that's the interpretation on the garden glazing thing. If you're not familiar with it, the BC building officials, if you search BOA BC Interpretation Committee, you can go to that site and there's all kinds of different code interpretations that they have on that site. And you can actually submit for an interpretation as well. I would prefer that you send it to us so that we can submit and then give it to everybody. But it's wide open. It's public. You can do that if you like.
So Jagdeep had mentioned that they have a sample. If anybody's interested to see the head clip relationship to that sample.
Okay. Yeah, great.
Yeah. The test wall that we tested is in our facility. So for this week, because Adrian and Terry were going to swing by, so we held on to it. So if anybody's interested, please feel welcome to come to Centra, have a look, and more than welcome the input or any challenges on it. Yeah,
Chucky, was it 2x4, 2x6?
it was 2x6.
I have another issue. It's 2x4 was all you need, right? 2x6 is just one.
We're going to take that downstairs. All right. Thanks again for coming. Come on downstairs and have a drink with us.